If you were ever looking for a prime example to illustrate the fact that life isn't fair, simply take Zenyatta. While there are characters in this game that can farm eliminations off cooldown without doing as much as engaging in core body functions, Zenyatta is out there having to fear for his life in every waking second. But that doesn't mean that you're completely helpless. If there's one thing I learned from the rank 1 support god Echo Flex, it's the fact that shot calling can be your ticket to victory more often than not. I mean, the man doesn't even main Zenyatta, and yet he's stacking up victories just by telling his teammates how to play the video game. The sad part about that is that this is what it takes to make Zenyatta work. Listen, sometimes I just want to toss a diva bomb out there and get a play of the game, rather than having to worry about every step I take being the last one. I mean, some of these DLC heroes just get to sit on high ground all day without a care in the world because they can shrug off diving attempts all on their own. But Zenyatta, even when you got flawless positioning, you're literally just not meant to survive every single engagement. The best thing you can do when getting bullied by the enemy team is blowing your ultimate, which honestly is already kind of a victory for them as far as ult economy is concerned. I won't lie if I said that it doesn't make me bitter to see heroes like Hammond being able to roll around undisturbed unless somebody really goes out of their way to counter them, whereas Zenyatta gets destroyed by the enemy team looking at him the wrong way. But there is a saving grace. Zenyatta is currently a meta hero. Now, I will admit that I went into open queue more than once to one-trick Zen and force my teammates to play goats around me, but fact of the matter is that at the current balance of the game, Zenyatta is a really good pick. If you look at the support leaderboard for the last season of competitive play, you'll be finding a lot of players that ran Zenyatta, though only few of them actually one-tricked him. But a hero you won't be finding a lot of is the one that we decided to take a look at on our last episode. In our noble pursuit of checking out every hero that has recently been rebalanced, we took up the challenge of one-tricking the queen of off-meta picks, Symmetra. While a lot of characters in this game are being one-tricked to very extensive degrees, only few of them are as infamous as those that were previously known to be defense heroes. In an attempt of making the likes of Torbjorn and Symmetra more broadly viable, Jeff has bastardized their kits time and time again just to eventually give up on them. For a while now, Symmetra players were asking the developers to not abandon their main hero, but what they got out of it wasn't what they expected. An increase of plus 25 to her total HP wasn't exactly what a lot of people had in mind, but hey, a buff is a buff, and as such we will try to run it through its paces. While Zenyatta has not been buffed directly during the last patch, the balance of Overwatch is very fragile. Baptiste and Brigitte were fortunate enough to receive Kaplan's blessing, and by proxy, Zenyatta suddenly became a much better pick. But as we all know, meta does not always equate to fun. Only because Zen is being played more often doesn't mean it is actually more enjoyable to play him. So is this the right time for me to reignite my competitive career, or should I continue to stick to my beloved casual play? Well, the first step to finding out is seeing if I can one-trick Zenyatta in quick play before moving over to ranked. Though do leave a comment down below to let me know if you want to see some competitive gameplay. Anyway, it's time to find out how good Zenyatta really is by taking today's story to Nombani. Despite Zenyatta's increase in popularity, I had to steel my mind and remain ever vigilant. Nombani was a difficult target for me to attack considering the overabundance of high ground that hit-scan heroes absolutely love to abuse. We found ourselves immediately under fire by, surprise surprise, a mercy-pocketed Soldier 76 on high ground who was determined to keep us away from the objective. My tanks were woefully unimpressed with the fact that said player had deleted our main healer and continued to push forward to claim the objective in sheer disregard of their squishy teammates. Of course, the red team, and Kraken in particular, had no trouble defeating our careless tank line until they had to face me. They probably expected the same level of competence as they've seen my tanks display, but little did they know that I'm not actually bad at the game, I just pretend to be for the sake of content. Nobody's going to believe that lie, Cliff. After having defeated both of their tanks, I was left with only a sliver of HP to also combat the opposing Mercy. You can tell that I had my tryhard pants on because I immediately opened up with a headshot while trying to matrix dodge her bullet. But unfortunately for me, Mercy's firing guided missiles the approximate size of Hammond's mech, meaning there was no surviving. That first teamfight was all the defenders had to see to realize that we were completely dysfunctional as a group. They would offer us no respect as a response to our lack of threat, holding a very close defensive position that had no right to work. But all of that would change when the enemy McCree fell off the high ground to become an isolated target for my soldier. Temporal Rift had opened this teamfight up for us, and I'm fairly certain that the defenders did not expect that level of aggression from a team that just moments earlier didn't seem to have any idea of how to play this video game. While our DPS were taking control of the high ground, the rest of our team walked under the objective on main, and the blue team was trying to hold onto their lives for another chance to contest. They could struggle for sure, but nothing would stop the inevitable result of this team fight, which ended with us taking control of the objective. Considering our opening fight, I really didn't think that we'd be able to take the point in a sweep like this, but more importantly than that was keeping up the pace. Let's see what the defenders got up their sleeves now that we have proven to be worthy opponents. I'm surprised to say that our successful first point capture, while definitely relying on enemy misplays, was assuredly a case of DPS diff. While Ana and I were making ourselves comfortable on the card, the rest of our team was pushing up to reinforce our advantage, and I gotta say, watching two soldiers run towards the enemy spawn is a sight I wasn't expecting today. As much as I was impressed by our Echo's cleanup, I can't say the same for Azaria, who decided to full send it into the enemy team with 150 HP and no line of sight to her supports. Making matters worse, our soldier was trying to set up a crazy flank that unfortunately got shut down immediately. Granted, losing 2 players while attempting to snowball your way into a second point cap is a surefire way of losing all of your momentum. But still, we weren't intending to back down just yet, ready to combat whatever the enemies decided to toss at us. Well, that's what I thought until the enemy diva took that very literally and tossed her mech at us to great effect. In what I can only assume to be another lapse of judgment, my Zarya figured she could make up for previous feeding by feeding even harder again, and well, I didn't want to be the one to tell her that this is not how that works. The defenders had successfully pushed us back into our spawn and naturally kept us there for quite some time. It's always frustrating to be on the receiving end of a spawn camp, but hey, maybe we can pull off another miracle like we did on the first point. I feel like by then it dawned on my Zarya that she has not been making the best decisions leading up to this moment. Determined to make up for her failure, she decided to lead the charge and take the court by storm with an ultimate. And since the defenders had a stronger sense of self-preservation than us, whoever survived the Graviton Surge tried to run away just to eventually be chased down. It seems like we have learned from our previous mistakes. Positioning ourselves more smartly this time around and having the card follow shortly behind us was definitely a big plus. You remember that sense of self-preservation I just mentioned? Yeah, maybe they were too worried about their own well-being because without even putting up a good effort to stop us, they just surrendered at the second point. Well, if they don't want to come out of the hidey hole to take the fight to the objective, then I guess we just have to take the fight to their spawn. I don't know what had bitten the defenders to suddenly play so passively, but Temporal abused the heck out of that by boldly visoring in their backline. My Zarya decided to join in on the fun, and if I didn't know any better, I would have claimed that this is a completely different team from the first team fight in this match. I know that Halloween is over already, but it definitely looks like the reenactment of several horror movie scenes is currently taking place in the enemy spawn. Speaking of horror movie, it dawned on me just then that the enemies actually had a second DPS besides their soldier, one which had been playing Mystery Heroes until they landed on Sombra. Thankfully, I could trust my Ana to not leave me alone against what is arguably one of my worst matchups, and following that confidence-inducing sleep dart, I decided to join my team in their spawn camping efforts. Now, you would assume that Zenyatta's right-click is one of the fastest ways to delete somebody off the map, but we often forget that Soldier's Helix rocket is on an unreasonably short cooldown and rivals the time it takes me to charge up my attack in the first place. So naturally, the old man just turned around to immediately pulverize me and any of my hopes of survival. Gosh, I hate it here. Now, honestly, I couldn't tell you what happened here while I was on the flank, but I guess we somehow all died, and, well, back to square one, I suppose. Needless to say that them having swapped to a Sombra made this entire game an order of magnitude more annoying for me, and that's without even mentioning the fact that all of our picks were completely meaningless because they just resurrected them every time. The defenders were back at giving us no respect whatsoever. We couldn't follow up on any of the plays we tried to set up, and instead had to disengage every time we lost one too many teammates to the spam. My Echo was determined to change that and make the executive decision that if our tanks don't want to go in, they'll just become a tank themselves. Granted, Ana and I had to take cover because all the divas began tossing about nuclear bombs like it was no big deal, but when the dust settled, the carbon copy ended up on top. We were all set up for victory at that point, and it didn't even cross our minds that there was still a way for us to lose this match, but sadly, we were in for a rude awakening. I really thought I was being smug when I positioned myself on the balcony, but what I didn't expect was for the Sombra to target me as opposed to trying to stop the card. Of course, my immediate response was trying to get her away from the objective so that even if I end up eliminated, at least I could buy my team some time. But what I didn't realize was the fact that she never intended to finish me off. Her translocator was positioned right next to the card, allowing him to jump in with a massive EMP. My entire team was now stuck in a Graviton Surge with no abilities at their disposal, while my miscalculation put me too far away from them. But there was still one chance. I used Transcendence to close the distance and save my teammates in the nick of time. Unfortunately, this is when my act of heroism ends. Pack Visor, Mercy Res, and for some reason my Echo spent the better half of a minute chasing after the enemy Zenyatta without ever hitting him, which honestly I consider an inhumane achievement. It was at this moment that it dawned on us, nay, that we were rudely reminded of the fact that we're playing on Nombani. Sustaining a Graviton Surge is great and all, but when you're playing 2 CP on wheels, it takes more than just surviving to win the game. The enemy Sombra continued to be extremely obnoxious on on high ground, which I hated here, okay? Why is that hero a thing? I guess I could say that for most of the DLC heroes they added to the game. Trust me when I say that I really tried to add to my team's lethality, but at the end of the day, and despite popular beliefs, Zenyatta is still a support hero. I couldn't frag out enough to make up for feeding DPS and cowardly tanks at the same time, and it definitely didn't help that the enemies continued to swap to more stalling heroes that incidentally also countered me more than their previous pick. With only 10 seconds left on the clock, we wouldn't even be able to get a proper team fight in. Chances are somebody would have to sacrifice themselves just to give us a shot at fighting. We barely managed to trigger overtime and even lost temporal before engaging the fight, but then something changed. I don't know if it's the fact that the defender's spawn advantage goes down the drain in OT, or if our echoes suddenly realize that they are playing a busted hero, but it actually looked like we had a chance. As much as the enemy Sombra denied our hopes of finishing this fight with a big ultimate, there's more than one way of getting our hands on a Graviton Surge, and our Echo was about to show us how. Temporal came back just in time not only to allow Echo to build a graph, but to actually go into Terra and clean up the remaining defenders while they were lacking support. It may have seemed like our team was having a hard time breaking through the last point, but in actuality, we were merely playing for overtime to break that 2 CP advantage while pretending that we're completely incompetent by feeding our brains out in previous fights. And where was I while all of that happened? Well, I was off on the flank to demonstrate the fact that it is impossible to miss a shot on Zenyatta's hitbox when playing in this corridor in Nombani. Honestly, jokes aside, this is just the kind of hero that Zenyatta is. If you're trying to go for silly plays, then you best be prepared to bring your A game, because the man has absolutely no means of rectifying misplays when you screw up. And I guess that's fine. Yeah, of course I wish that his hitbox wasn't so overblown, but I don't think I would enjoy playing Zenyatta if they actually made him easier to play. It is the adversity I am facing that makes it satisfying at the end of the day. And the only reason it is so funny to me when I actually succeed on my flanks is because he has no right being successful in doing so. So am I gonna go back to competitive play after having tried to one-trick Zen in quick play? I don't know. It takes an insanely good player to make him work on every single map, which is why you see barely anyone actually maining him in comp. And I don't know that it is fair to my team to put them at a constant disadvantage just because I want to play him. But hey, let me know your opinion down in the comment section below. And while you're at it, don't forget to drop me a like on your way out if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to see more, and definitely hit that bell icon to not miss out on my next upload. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace.
When you have 1k damage.
Why are you so bad? Why are you not playing your own account? Go back to silver. Why are you playing the diamond?
Competitive play in Overwatch really is its own beast. Listen, there's a good reason I've forsaken that life in favor of, well, actually having fun. This game has a lot to offer when it comes to having a casual fun time, but for some reason, there are a lot of people out there always hunting for the competition. Now, I understand where that desire comes from, because I started off just like them. Not to go old boomer on you guys, but back in my day, I actually aspired to hitting the Grandmaster rank in competitive play. Granted, a Grandmaster had to meet completely different standards a few years back than they do now. Our community has actually gotten pretty good at the game over the years, and what we call a platinum player today would have probably been good enough to at least get masters back when everyone had to figure the game out in the first place. What I'm trying to say is that only because I hit 4K back then doesn't mean I can do it now. I mean, heck, I get comments almost every week about how my gameplay is subpar because I'm trying to goof around in quick play, which I don't know how to help these people. Anyway, a lot of you guys are probably wondering how good or not so good I can play when I actually get serious. And while that hasn't been my focus in the last little while, I have had a bit of a competitive itch recently. So believe it or not, but we are going to jump back into competitive play for the first time in 20 seasons. If there was ever a time to subscribe to the channel, it would be now. The last time I was really committed to rank play was back in Season 4 with almost 200 games played. Rookie numbers, I know. And while I was still tryharding in Season 5, I didn't even play 60 games anymore while letting my SR decay to rock bottom. Do kids these days even still know about the decay mechanic? I had already given up by Season 6, where I just played a few games to get GM after my placements before once again letting it all decay. After that, all I did was messing around on ult accounts without the intention of actually taking it seriously. So as much as you may have seen a couple stories episodes where I played competitive, I haven't even completed my placements following these videos because I just couldn't be asked to do so. That means that today is going to mark a very special day because I'm committing to actually giving it my all, communicating with my teammates, and flexing where need be. We are going to take ranked seriously once more and find out if there's still some life left in these old bones, but before we can prove anything at all, we have to finish our placements. Well, the good thing is, this is literally unlosable, so
No, you said it. You jinxed it now.
Placement matches were definitely interesting to me because I started off on a really bad foot. Between people not trying the hardest on their ult accounts and me not knowing how I can get my team to actually act like one, I ended up losing both of my first games. It was, however, difficult to be genuinely upset about these games because I knew that I wasn't firing on all cylinders myself. Where it would have been easy for me to cancel that challenge immediately after such a bad start, all it took was one team turning the tables. Yo, what's up?
Not much, dude. What about you?
Just losing every game, you know?
Hell yeah.
Yes, I had to do my fair share of flexing, but all that was unfortunately part of the challenge. Zenyatta, Ana, and Lucio always have been my most played heroes, but I didn't want to be the reason we lost the game when it was perfectly winnable, so I always have been flexing when the rest of my team wouldn't. To me, that is just part of the competitive integrity. Regardless of that, Zenyatta would remain my most played hero by a landslide, and I was actually warming up my gameplay quite significantly, enough so that I ended up winning every single game after the first two. My placements would conclude with a sense of satisfaction because not only did my score turn around, but I also came across a lot of really fun individuals. Ultimately, with a 3-2 score, I would end up in 3200, which means that the real challenge had only just begun.
Can you please maybe swap Zenyatta?
As much as I'm willing to flex on my team, sometimes you just gotta hold your ground when you know for a fact that your hero pick isn't the problem, and instead it would have actually made the situation worse. He wasn't quite so polite the second time around, while completely ignoring the fact that me getting off my best hero isn't gonna stop our team from running their faces into a blender. We ultimately succeeded in pushing the card all the way to the end without me swapping, but on defense, I wouldn't get around playing something that can defend itself against dive. But at the end of the day, we secured the victory thanks to the power of team play, and I will be granted a hefty dose of SR for my troubles. I could feel the effect of the hidden MMR trying to push me towards a rank where I would be tested to the fullest degree, but in that moment, I was just having a blast. Flexing wasn't all bad either. Sure, I had to play Brigitte more often than I would have liked, but I also got to play Lucio and Ilios, which was really fun and challenging because my Lucio mechanics are lackluster to say the least. We even had what I can only assume to be a very intentional boostio situation, and I'm happy to report that I didn't completely choke. But as much fun as I was having, the game was showering me in so much SR that before I knew it, I was reaching my promotion game. I know that was a very long introduction, but our story today takes place on Dorado. With this being my promotion game, we are looking at the first ever episode where something tangible was on the line. My bragging rights. Granted, even if I win this game, all I have to show for myself is the Master's rank, but hey, if I can't even break into 3500, I might as well retire immediately. My habits of playing Dorado back in the day came back to me. Avoiding the spam coming from main while anticipating cheeky flanking plays set up on rooftops, I began the game very cautiously. My Reaper tried to push the enemy soldier off the high ground to allow us to move the payload safely, but found himself heavily under fire in an instant. It was then that the enemy Tracer initiated her dive onto my soldier, who failed to combo her with a Helix rocket. But of course I had to combat enough Tracers on my time to read her simplistic movement and send her back to her spawn room. We had the man advantage now, prompting my Hammond to full send it into the enemy team in an attempt of creating space. Space that we could indeed make use of. The enemies completely fell apart. For a team to be so SR thirsty as to start the game off playing double barrier, they sure as heck collapsed like lawn chairs the moment they lost a player. My Zarya pushed towards the enemy spawn all on her own while we tried to secure the first point cap, and what I assumed to be a noble sacrifice at the time of playing was revealed to be a severe lapse in judgment when looking at the replay. However, all's well that ends well, because regardless of their intentions, it allowed us to secure the first point. As the gates opened, I spotted my soldier losing a 1v1 against the enemy soldier and figured that as soon as I had line of sight, I would finish what he couldn't. Unfortunately for me, they were running a Mercy that, of course, invalidated my efforts. Being given another chance at life, the enemy soldier tried to visor in our backline, but found himself eliminated again after having been outplayed in every conceivable metric. The enemies would have done a lot better with a tactical retreat, but now they were on the stagger train as they desperately tried to save themselves from the onslaught of my team. I, in the meantime, was delegated to moving the payload. Knowing they'd have trouble closing the distance, their soldier made a swap to Widowmaker, and you know as well as me that even if they never land a shot, just that mere presence is going to affect our positioning from here on out. But there was a more immediate problem on my mind. Their Tracer had just blown up my Zarya, and following that key pick, they made an attempt to have me follow her example. Thankfully, I could use my Hammond as a mobile barrier to calmly line up the one shot I needed to take her out. And as much as I wish that this was enough to capture the second point, we had been bleeding too much manpower throughout the poking phase, and when push came to shove, the defender's timely use of a number of ultimate abilities would prove to be our downfall. Losing momentum in diamond games is about the worst thing that can happen to you. Chances are your entire team was expecting this to be an easy game, but as soon as the enemies retaliate, the pointing of fingers begins.
Call behind us.
Can you call behind? Or you call nothing?
Just one shot me.
Just call nothing here.
While Rosaria was blaming the rest of us, I sure as heck was not happy about the fact that she was playing more like a zenyatta than I was. I mean, seriously, when I blow Transcendence was to run into the discorded enemy Ana, shouting down the microphone to go in, I expect my tanks to actually press W. Now, I'm not saying that he was the only one who made mistakes, but to be pointing fingers just in order to distract from your own incompetence is about as Overwatch of a move as I can imagine. Ultimately, we would end our attack round without capping the second point, and in addition to that, we had a lot of bad energy in our voice chat. 95 meters was the distance the enemy team had to beat, but the bigger challenge now was keeping our team together. It was now our turn to defend, and if I still wanted to win this game, I had to raise our spirits. Now, I'm not much of a motivational speaker, but one thing I can do is breaking the Geneva Convention. At the time of recording, Brigitte still had her plus 25 HP buff, and believe it or not, if you know how to make use of it, it can make a big difference even in Diamond. Barring a couple mistakes here and there, I was having a really good attack round on Zenyatta, but sometimes you doing well alone isn't good enough to win the game. If playing Brig can allow the rest of my team to survive their own misplays, then perhaps that is going to cause them to stop whining. Whatever the case may be, the attackers were coming to this round with a healthy dose of confidence, and that rightfully so. It didn't take us long at all to realize that holding high ground isn't gonna get us far with our composition, and to make matters worse, the enemy Widowmaker deleted our echo in an instant, leaving us to fight at a disadvantage. By some grace of Jeff, we managed to hold our ground at the choke point, with the enemy team being unsure how they are supposed to approach this fight when just walking into us is no longer an option. Something the enemy Doomfist would also learn very quickly as he found himself utterly countered. But the blue team were a tricky bunch. Their Widowmaker went for a big flank and took her time to line up a shot in order to create the advantage her team needed. A barrage of body shots would eventually grab our attention, but at that moment, I just had to trust my team that they would be able to handle it while we tried to secure the front line. It wasn't exactly ideal to have my Tracer as well as my Hammond chase after a low HP Widowmaker, but hey, they got her at the end of the day, so at least there's that. Playing Brigitte allowed me to allocate more brain capacity to shot calling when otherwise I would have had to dedicate that to actually playing the game. The enemy Widowmaker's flank, while not inherently successful, did create an opening for the attackers that they just barely failed to make use of. We were on thin ice here. A single slip-up could mean losing the point. Yeah, okay, so we slipped up and lost the point. Listen, everything was going fine until the enemies used one too many ultimates with us not having a good response for it. But even more importantly than that, my team's mental state was deteriorating at a breakneck pace. As we backed out, I noticed that one of our DPS had swapped to a Bastion, which I couldn't justify that pick under any logical circumstance, even if I tried. Half of the enemy team was going for a massive flank off on our opposite side, and when my Hammond called that out, I started to light up our voice chat. We had a clear man advantage fighting for the cart right now, meaning I tried to gather my team to take the fight on the payload. We may have lost our scouting Hammond, but the fight for the objective was going exactly as planned, smashing the attackers into the ground while the rest of their team tried to set up a play. At that point, the next step was simple. Stay on the cart and welcome the flankers with open arms to decimate them in similar fashion. Unfortunately, my Bastion disagreed with that idea and much preferred going off on his own to then die to set flankers. What was supposed to be an easy teamfight for us to win was now turned into a bit of a hassle, with a very real possibility of us losing the entire game. Considering my team's poor coordination and target priority, I made it my job to shout hero names into voice chat in hopes of them finally acting like a unit. It was clear to me that I wanted to play much more aggressively than the rest of my team, which is odd because playing aggressively is what won us the first point, and it is also how we succeeded defending the first time around. Until we didn't. Speaking of which, the enemy team had banked enough ultimates to win 5 teamfights over, and my teammates' questionable positioning would once again be their downfall. My team got absolutely annihilated while I was dueling the enemy Genji, and what followed was an excruciatingly long period in which I was attempting to guard the body for res, as it slowly but surely dawned on me that the reason nobody was listening to my calls was because everyone was dead. In an act of sheer desperation, I used my ultimate to... I don't even know what I was trying to do. I was completely lost at that point and just hit Q in panic, which of course only had me waste an ability that could have helped us stabilize in the next teamfight. A teamfight that I wasn't even sure if we're still gonna get, considering the fact that the enemy Roadhog just went on a tear via means of flanking. To make matters worse, he tried to spawn camp our support line as well, and needless to say that my Baptiste was more desperate for help than YouTubers are desperate for you to hit the like button. Ultimately, the enemy team was approaching their final destination, and all I could do is watch my teammates get decimated as they waste ultimate abilities in the same way I did. Touch point. It's not happening. You can hear the desperation in my voice. There was no way I could survive the combined forces of the enemy team if I was to just go out to touch the card. To be entirely honest with you guys, I had already surrendered to the idea that this game was over. But one person who hadn't given up yet was my Hammond. He rolled out towards the objective with a fire in his heart that was meant to reignite our hopes. The enemy team was less than a meter away from finishing this game off when he finally managed to stop them, and it was in this moment that we saw an opportunity to stay in the game. Bastion and I were attacking from different angles, picking off targets one by one instead of trying to assault the objective head-on, and our tricky maneuver would prove to be successful. This play came so out of nowhere that the attacking Echo was flustered enough to waste an ultimate, one which would have no impact whatsoever, and with only about a minute left on the clock, they would definitely want that one refunded. Desperation was in the air now, but this time, it would be the attackers who are struggling. As much as it felt like they already had this one in the bag, our team pulled out every last energy reserve we had to make our last stands mere meters away where we failed the first time around. Our McCree in particular was having the final fight of his life. Every bullet was being fired with conviction in order to not only keep us in the game, but deliver the victory that most of us believed to be out of reach. And before we knew it, the clock read overtime. Tress one. Lucio. Doom. Ball. Just a monkey. Good job, holy crap. Dude, Josh, that carry. What an absolutely insane comeback from the brink of annihilation. Man, I know that my McCree absolutely popped off at the end there, but wasn't it for my Hammond touching the point when I thought us already defeated? We wouldn't even have had a chance to fight. And with that Herculean effort behind us, it was only fitting to be granted a promotion. Okay, fine, that wasn't actually my promotion match. I got Masters off of a game on Lijiang Tower that we stomped so unbelievably quickly that I forgot to record the second half of it. I mean, I thought I hit the record button, but I guess I must have forgotten. Either way, I went completely undefeated following my first two placement games and skyrocketed all the way from 3200 back into Masters. And honestly, it was kind of fun. I understand that because I didn't lose any of my games, I was less likely to run into toxic players complaining all the time. But regardless of that, I made a lot of positive memories with a lot of really fun people. Also, I know that YouTubers always ask for you to click the like button, but genuinely, if you want to see more competitive play on the channel, do drop me a like and leave a comment down below. I will admit that with the current shift towards double barrier, I'm not exactly looking forward to playing more ranked until they change it, but still, if an overwhelming majority of people really want to see competitive play despite the story pacing issues, I'll at least give it a try. With that said, thank you everybody so much for watching, make sure you are subscribed to not miss out on the next episode, and definitely hit that bell icon so that you get notified. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace. There is nothing that unites a community quite like their desire to watch their content creator of choice suffer. Need me to prove it? When I played competitive on the last episode, I asked you guys to drop me a like in the comment if you want to see more videos of me playing ranked. And the answer was an overwhelming yes. At the same amount of views, that video scored twice as many likes as its quick play counterpart. And the comments were absolutely full of people exclaiming how much they enjoyed the fact that there was some kind of stakes on the line. I mean, hey, it helps out the YouTube algorithm and is a great way of finding out what sort of content you guys want to see. So, if you would be so kind as to absolutely annihilate the like button once more, me and my Q4 ad revenue would very much appreciate it. However, let us not forget that a content creator is but a humble servant to their audience. As such, you ask and you shall receive. You wanted to see more competitive gameplay, and there's nothing that's going to stop me from delivering the content you desire. Okay, maybe there's one thing. Listen, I'm not the only one who's a fan of the double barrier meta that has crystallized over the past couple of weeks. My queue times, even in quick play, have blown up in a significant way, meaning if I want to get this video done anytime soon, we have to expedite the process. Desperate times ask for desperate measures, meaning it is time to queue for tank. Let me tell you, playing tank as a support main is a very different experience from playing tank as, well, a tank main. I have absolutely no reservations about solo ulting DPS players who try to spawn camp my supports, and if you think that I will be desperate enough for SRS to stoop so low and play double barrier, think again. The most fun part about being a tank really are the main tank mind games. Especially in Reinhardt 1v1s, you really get to know the opposing team in a way that other roles don't. And once you have figured out their playstyle, establishing your dominance via a flashy display of tank diff is the the most immediately gratifying experience you can have in this game. But not all is fun and mind games in the tank category. Being a big, easy-to-hit target really makes you realize just how many different sorts of crowd control abilities are in the game. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say that in some team fights, I spent more time CC'd than not. Some would suggest that this means playing tank would require an innate ability to strategize in order to play around all these different sorts of abilities, considering the fact that your tank failing to create space can spell doom for your hopes of winning the game. But nobody has time to coordinate a bunch of ranked players like a tier 8 amateur team, so why say many word when few word do trick? The loudest language on this planet is the sound you hear when smashing down on your W key. Nobody ever won a game of Overwatch by pressing S anyway, so it is time for you to press W and only W. Just W. Just W. That approach to playing tanks has allowed me to win every single game that wasn't a DPS diff and ultimately landed me in 3200. Now, as much as the last episode was about my attempt of riding back to Masters, no such thing is going to happen anytime soon here. Leading up to our story today, I was actually on a very tilting losing streak, so let's find out if we can break the curse and carry our way to victory, or submit to the fact that we're just not meant to be in Diamond. Ladies and gentlemen, today's episode of Overwatch Ranked Stories takes place on Hollywood. Right from the get-go, I have to apologize for the fact that you'll see me starting this match off on Roadhog. I have had a lot of games that day where some random smurf was insta-locking Hog, and I figured that if somebody's going to feed their brains out on that hero, it might as well be me. Frankly speaking, I wasn't really that worried about what the enemies are going to play, more than I was afraid of how my own team is going to find a way to make this match more difficult than it has to be. I guess playing Roadhog would do the trick. Anyway, there was no time to lose as the attackers stormed out the gates to try and assault the objective. They came out with a Reinhardt Zarya comp, and while I do respect the old classics, him charging onto the battlefield before the rest of his team can catch up meant that he became easy pickings as every single defender laid into him. But much to my dismay, the enemy team was running a Mercy that, with the simple press of a button, could pretend that nothing had happened at all. But you can tell that his immediate annihilation left its mark. Their Reinhardt, while alive, was unsure of how he should approach the site. I, on the other hand, could make use of his indecision by eliminating him in a bit more permanent fashion, though I paid with my own life in order to achieve that. Thankfully, my team had already shredded the attackers to the point where me dying didn't have any effects at all. The red team had to go back to the drawing board and find a more cohesive way of staging their attack. After having witnessed the enemy Reinhardt's poor performance, I was feeling very confident about meeting him on even ground. I wouldn't pass up on an opportunity to test my skills in a Reinhardt vs Reinhardt matchup, as our official no double barrier handshake made this game a very pleasant experience. The next team fight went much in our favor as well. While their tanks were clashing in an attempt to establish dominance, my McCree found the perfect opportunity to use his ultimate and secure victory once more. The attackers were in full retreat mode as they tried to avoid donating more ultimate charge than necessary, and you can be certain that I was happy about the fact that I finally had DPS players on my team who turned their monitors on. But little did I know at that point how much trouble that mercy-pocketed Smurf account would cause. After an obnoxious losing streak, I was really glad to find myself in a game where I got to flex my main tank muscle. I outplayed the opposing Reinhardt with ease, while the red team depleted the ultimate bank without a good return on investment. It's gotten to the point where I bullied their main tank off of Reinhardt, and now he would try his luck at destroying my barrier the way I annihilated his at the beginning. Of course, I had to adjust my playstyle accordingly, but since the red team no longer had a main tank to protect them, I would have no trouble at all finding an opening for a shatter. Unfortunately, our team had varying ideas about how aggressively we should approach this defense. While I obviously wanted to go for stagger kills to bleed more time off the clock, I quickly found myself without the help of my cowardly supports. My McCree, on the other hand, figured he'd try his hand at frontlining for a hot minute, but was taught very swiftly that plus 25 HP don't turn a DPS into a tank. Losing one DPS was definitely bad, but what was even worse than that was losing the second one as well. All of this could have been avoided if only our team was on the same page when it comes to our game plan, particularly the age-old gambit of chasing staggers. Things only went downhill from here as our former McCree, now soldier, found himself spawn camped by the opposing pharmacy. With a play like that, the attackers ensured that we'd be suffering from a split spawn, and as such, they would earn themselves a lot of distance on the payload. To say that we had a hard time coming back from that misplay would be an understatement. Despite the presence of no less than 4 hit-scan heroes on our team, we just couldn't deal with all the damage raining down on us from the sky. It wasn't until our Baptiste finally took care of the enemy Pharah that we had a chance of stopping the payload only a few meters away from this second point camp. You can discuss the intricacies of whether or not investing a nanovisor for cleanup on what was already a victorious engagement was worth it, but considering how badly we got rolled up until this point, I can't blame them for trying to really drive home this victory. Once again, our team was not at all on the same page about our positioning. While Zarya, Ana, and I were terrified of the idea that we could C9 the turret, the other half of our team tried to do their hit scan diligence by sitting up on high ground. The thing with controlling high ground as a hit scan player, though, is that it doesn't matter if you can't land a shot. The red team was willfully unimpressed with with our lack of accuracy and took it back in no time at all. My unwillingness of swapping meant that I couldn't protect my hit scans and be on C9 watch at the same time, and that shadow that I was holding onto obviously didn't prove to be useful in the face of a team that put all of their resources into a character that was dominating the sky. But the real nuisance here was the enemy Mercy. Not only did she keep on reviving the few eliminations that my team could muster to obtain, but it was obvious to me that their power wouldn't be half as effective if it wasn't for them turning splash damage into annihilation damage with the press of a button. But two can play at that game. One of our supports made the noble sacrifice of combating fire with fire, and their bold confidence that prompted the attackers to act like our spawn area was theirs would ultimately be their downfall. But we were far from victorious at that point though. If we cannot cleanly wipe the attackers and as such annihilate every last bit of momentum they acquired, then there's no way we're going to be able to stop them from capping the last point, which means it was time to send a message. I brought my hammer down with a ferocity that rivals the god of thunder himself, but all that would mean nothing if I didn't follow up on it. Inspired by my act of confidence, my team followed straight behind me to cover my reckless assault, and as such, we found ourselves victorious at last. Except we hadn't succeeded in actually wiping their team, and me, thinking the rest of my comrades would still follow me, ran it down mid into certain doom. We found ourselves in a perpetual state of combat ever since they capped the first point, and nothing I did or said could convince my team to try and defuse it along with me. It is really frustrating to see when people think that getting a pick or two is enough to end a team fight when you give up so much more by not chasing down the survivors. If nobody else, at least my Zarya started to understand what I was on about, as she followed my every move in order to make sure that I can pull off the game-winning play we needed to. Wow, that was really poorly worded. A game-winning play to win the game. Good job, Cliff! Can you tell I write for a living? Either way, it was unfortunate that my Zarya woke up the Roadhog that I meant to charge, but ending up in the enemy backline was just what I needed to land my shatter. My Zarya must have realized the importance of taking out the enemy supports, and while missing the enemy Mercy with that graph wasn't ideal, she can only revive so many players, and their Ana would not be one of them. The two of us were brawling it out in the front line to defuse the attackers' engagement before they could set up on the payload, but because the rest of our team didn't move up with us, they found themselves heavily under attack by a Tracer. Playing against a smurfing Tracer is always really frustrating to me when queuing for tank, because I've actually gotten pretty good at combating them on Zenyatta over the years. But whenever I'm on Reinhardt, or heck, even on Roadhog, I find myself struggling to deal with them more than I have any right to. The attackers' big advantage was the fact that our team wasn't functioning as a unit. The distance between our front and backline has been the deciding factor all throughout this game, but now that the payload is mere meters away from its final destination, there was no longer a distinction between the two as everybody tossed themselves on the objective. Zarya and I were finally in our element as I uttered the words that would inspire our entire team to give it their all in this last team fight. Keep me up, I have shatter. There was no hiding from my hammer now. If the enemies wanted to capture this objective, they would have to take it from my cold, lifeless hands. And I wasn't about to make that easy for them. They can stall and stall all they want, but ultimately all it took for us to stop the payload was being in a position where we couldn't help but be stacked together. I really hope that this round gave my teammates some food for thought, because if we can't fix our indecisiveness, attacking on Hollywood is going to be rough. After that roller coaster of emotions that was our defense round, I really couldn't help but feel anxious about how our offense is gonna go. When it comes to our individual matchups, I was confident in us being able to give the red team a run for their money. The only problem was that they were really good at funneling all of their resources in unison versus us, who only have a vague idea of the word team play. The first teamfight of the round immediately showcased that exact thing, because while I wanted to push the front line back onto the objective, both of our DPS were busy whipping shots on a single Torbjorn that we could have easily LOS'd. Me and my barrier were sent packing in an instant, and even after all that happened in the previous round, my Zarya was the only one who understood how to play aggressively. Unfortunately, her confidence in my abilities and leadership caused her to be stuck behind enemy lines, and without me being able to protect her retreat, she couldn't help but get staggered. Now, this is gonna sound really cocky, but the problem with having higher elo experience is the fact that you're trying to play how you learn to win. Overwatch is a fast-paced game, and aggression, more often than not, is the key to victory. It would have been really easy for me to throw a hissy fit about my teammates not playing correctly, but really, it was my fault for not adjusting my playstyle. Of course, my teammates weren't playing like a team of grandmasters because they're freaking diamonds. Ultimately, what matters more than playing properly is playing together. It doesn't matter if you're feeding, as long as you're feeding as a team, and in that moment, the enemies understood that much more so than us. As much as I knew that I was the better Reinhardt, none of that mattered if he's getting supported by his entire squad, while my own comrades are playing so far in the back that they could swap heroes if they wanted. It dawned on me that, in order to capture this objective, I had to get tricky. Making use of the fact that the red team loved to stack together, I went for a quick flank shadow to disrupt their lineup. Of course, everyone tried to rush in to help, which put them in the perfect position to get caught by my Zarya's Graviton Surge, where by then, they wouldn't have enough cooldowns to survive the damage. I had given my life in the process, but at last we could sit our team on the objective and finally get the show on the road. Player was coming in clutch with the key hero swaps all game long, and while the red team made a desperate attempt to stall out the cap, they would be no match for the combined forces of a team that had no choice but to attack the same target. It most assuredly was not smooth sailing from there on out, but I slowly started to understand what had to be done in order for us to win the game. This wasn't about me trying to ego the enemy Reinhardt, neither was it about trying to get a team of diamonds to play like masters. All I had to do was consistently run it down mid in order to bait out all of the enemy team's cooldowns so that my Zarya could make use of the free real estate and dish out the damage that my DPS were unable to provide. I mean, in fairness, it's not like they were completely useless. If nothing else, the ultimates were on point when it came to keeping the enemies on the stagger train. But to think that all I had to do to win the game was acting like an incompetent boosted diamond player was absolutely insane to me. Unfortunately, it just wasn't meant to be that easy, because our Japanese DPS Smurf over there was exhausting every single choice in the game that could benefit from a mercy pocket. Of course, the enemies had ultimates to spare because of how long they didn't get a proper teamfight for, and as such, we found our momentum utterly obliterated. The only saving grace was the fact that I still had my Shatter. As long as I don't waste it like an actual diamond right now, we should be able to come back. About that. This was definitely a bad situation. We had wasted too much time on the first point to be able to afford blunders like that, not to mention the psychological impact that is bound to affect my teammates with every lost engagement. Thankfully, we still had some aces up our sleeves. Our Hanzo opening the teamfight up was just the boosting courage we needed to challenge the opposition. By that point in the game, I had convinced my entire team to tape down the W key along with me, and you can tell that the enemy Reinhardt was not sure about how to deal with that. The red team had to funnel every available cooldown and ultimate into his survival, but even landing a massive shadow couldn't negate his panic as he completely whiffed a charge. I was hiding my true power for most of this attack round, but with us engaging in what we hoped to be the final team fight, I figured it was only fitting to make use of my gargantuan brain to show their Reinhardt once and for all that I was the better tank. I had tasted blood, and thanks to my Ana's nano boost, I'd finally enjoyed the support that I needed in order to satisfy my rage, with every swing of my hammer becoming much more deadly. The temptation of charging into the surviving defenders was there, but I tried to make sure I don't end up getting sleep-dart. We were approaching the last few meters of our journey, ready to combat whatever stalling nonsense the defenders would decide to swap to, but at last, they had given up. Now, this may seem like an abrupt ending to many of you, but you can find the true resolution of this match in the lobby chat. As it turned out, our smurfing friend over there had been incredibly toxic throughout the match while demanding a mercy pocket. Much like I was playing below my usual SR, he couldn't adjust to the playstyle of diamonds and probably got very tilted over the fact that me feeding my brains out somehow helped us winning teamfights. If that wasn't the morale of our story, I don't know what is. Between two players trying to rank up in diamond, one of them decided that the only way to win was by demanding everyone to play around them, while I was out there trying to find a way for us to play as a team. Ultimately, I couldn't carry this game any harder because I couldn't carry at all. This victory was the result of our combined efforts, and misplays or no, I couldn't have done it without the rest of my team. Just like I couldn't have made this video without you guys watching. Your continued support is what motivates me to work hard on the content I put out, and I really hope that I can meet your expectations. If I did, hey, let me know by dropping me a like on your way out. Consider subscribing if you want to see more, and definitely ring that bell to be notified about my next upload. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace! So according to YouTube analytics, about half of you guys watching are living somewhere in North America. That means it is very likely that half of you have never had the chance, nay, the privilege of experiencing the wonders of the European ladder firsthand. I mean, I'm fairly certain that many of you heard tale of this fabled land in which everyone is speaking different languages, with the only shared vocabulary consisting of a variety of English profanity. But not all is bad about competing on this side of the pond. When lacking voice chat, you start improving your mechanics out of necessity. In a way, it feels like playing Overwatch in hard mode. I mean, really, it shouldn't be that difficult to pull off a Graph Dragon combo against a team that has no defensive ultimates to speak of, but said thing gets a bit more complicated when your Zarya is not in voice chat to hear that you are a couple % off your ultimates. That's why, back in my prime, I have always prioritized improving myself mechanically. Because while it would be easier for a team to coordinate for simple combos, no such thing is an easy task when playing on EU. I can't control what my teammates are doing, but I sure as heck can control how many heads I'm clicking. But the thing is, I'm an old man now. I don't have the the patience nor inclination to try and hard carry my way into another golden weapon. So now that I have returned to competitive play after my years-long break, my approach has most certainly changed. I mean, honestly, Overwatch is simply more fun when everyone is in voice chat and trying the hardest to play the game the way it was intended to be played, as a team. And today's story is interesting to me because it isn't like the first ranked episode where the gameplay told a tale with epic conclusion, and it's not like the second one where I walked away from it with an important lesson learned. This one, more than anything, was memorable to me because of the people I played with. And hey, if you've been enjoying these most recent ranked episodes, do let me know by dropping me a like. That's a great way of supporting me and telling me to keep them coming. So with that out of the way, our story today takes place on Volskaya Industries. Now, if there was ever a map type in Overwatch that allows for any twist of events to happen, it would be 2CP. There's no other game mode that lends itself so much to snowballing as well as any number of random events. And it is for that very fact that I usually stay away from covering 2CP maps in my videos because the pacing is just all over the place and it makes it really hard to tell a coherent story. But that's not gonna stop me from trying anyway, as me and my team are tasked with defending the first objective. Now, as you may have seen last week, mercy-pocketed Pharah Smurfs are very much par for the course in Diamond, and since I was kicking the game off playing Mei, I could only hope that my second DPS was up to the task. But before said DPS even had a chance to make a play, my Hammond went on the flank too. I mean, I'm assuming that he was trying to combat them, but really this was not looking like a very promising attempt. Our frontline was not looking much better either. My Sigma had a really bad case of backline tanking, meaning we gave the attackers all the space in the world to simply push past the choke point, and before we knew it, we found ourselves bombarded from multiple angles. At this point, you would assume that the enemies had us cornered and that we were stuck in a tight spot, but in reality, we weren't stuck with them at all. They were stuck with us. We allowed them to push onto the objective to cage them in with an ice wall so that our Hammond can poke them from behind, while our soldier proceeds to put his hit scan prowess on display by annihilating the enemy squishies. And as for their last remaining tank, my Zenyatta and I didn't even give him a chance to heal himself as he got deleted by a Discord orb freezing combo. Their Pharah was still floating around in our backline, but without the help of their mercy, it was only a matter of time that they found themselves eliminated. Nobody has said a word in voice chat at that point, and as much as I was framing this engagement in a way that made it look like we had everything under control, in reality there were a million things we could have done to play that much more smartly. The very next engagement painted a very similar picture where it was not cohesion that allowed us to come out on top. In typical EU fashion, we just outskilled the opposition with basic plays that, even though played improperly, were still good enough to take home the W. Now here's where the lack of communication really comes to bite us, because while my Hammond as well as my soldier were pressuring the enemy Pharah into basically doing nothing for that entire teamfight, I, as a projectile player, didn't at all pay attention to her in order to secure the fight at the front line. And since nobody called out her position, you can imagine my surprise when I suddenly ate a damage boosted rocket from behind. Oh, they're behind us again. Pharmacy. My lack of omnipresent awareness getting me killed is one thing, but what really blew my mind at that point was my team's lack of pattern recognition. You would really assume that since all of them saw that this Pharah blew me up, they would know not to stand in the same position as to avoid suffering the same fate. Except they didn't. The enemy Pharah got away with 2 eliminations before anyone bothered to attack her, but at that point the damage was already done. Since my soldier didn't have a Discord orb or damage boost of his own to combat the flying rat, even the use of his ultimate wouldn't achieve much more than being a general nuisance, one that they responded to by simply booping him off the map. By the time I returned to the objective, the situation was already looking dire. Our forces were dwindling, and the only way we could stabilize in this engagement was by investing an ultimate or two. But of course, since nobody was using voice chat, rather than using a select few ones, our team decided to dump our entire ultimate bank into this fight with reckless abandon. And the worst part about it is that this wasn't even enough to win. The enemy Tracer was running circles around us while picking off targets one by one. The longer this fight lasted, the more it seemed like all hope was lost. But that did not stop the cavalry from coming anyway. Since dying as a defender on the first point is completely inconsequential thanks to the instant respawn mechanic, we decided to throw our bodies at it one more time in an attempt to turn it around. The question is if that's gonna be enough. As much as I was ready to throw myself on the objective in a last-ditch effort of stopping the cap, my teammates, whom I assume continued to press W, suddenly decided to back off. And for the first time, that prompted them to actually use voice chat.
May, we're backing.
I'm touching? Are you guys not? What? Come on!
No, they got way too many people. We're only 3.
What do you mean we just got a pig?
Yeah, we got to pick up the ball, and then the other 5 are sitting on point.
How does nobody say anything until that moment?
We're in a voice channel together.
Excuse me, what? These people have been in a separate voice chat and just decided it wasn't necessary to communicate with me, who was trying to make callouts this entire time? Whatever they were talking about in that voice channel, it probably wasn't about the game, because our team's coordination was absolutely abysmal. But for the time being, we had more pressing concerns, because that Pharah player that has been going for the widest flanks known to mankind, yeah, they continue to do exactly that. And much to my surprise, it wasn't our soldier who tried to combat that, but instead our Hammond. I mean, I get not wanting to run into a situation where you become the victim of another environmental kill, but it was definitely annoying that you just hung out on our backline. But the thing is, they weren't really doing anything useful. I understand trying to be methodical, but whatever they tried to do was more cowardly than anything else. I guess that's a lesson in only because that's an ult account doesn't mean it's a smurf, and all they ended up achieving was not playing the video game until they ran into our ulting soldier. But following that victorious team fight, something changed. Regardless of whether or not my team cared for it, I continued to call the shots, and surprisingly enough, I felt like I finally had their attention. Tracer, on you, bap. They're gonna res it, guard the body. Ah, nice! Can we get this Hawk? No heal. Tracer half. Yeah, press one, nice. Now, usually I'm of the opinion that support is the perfect role to take the lead on shot calling because they have the best view of the entire battlefield. And it's possible that they were doing that, but considering the fact that nobody was talking to me, I just continued to do it myself to surprisingly great effect. But as much as our team's cohesion has improved after my little blunder at the first point, I do attribute some amount of our success to the fact that the enemy Pharah was just absolutely throwing the game. I mean, talk about a lack of confidence, or competence. They were taking pot shots from so far in the back, you'd assume they're playing a sniper. Not to mention that this poked at nothing because they already had their ultimates. Eventually, my Hammond got fed up with her and decided to spare them a visit in their spawn. I really want to know what exactly went through their head in that moment, as they insisted to continue playing what is arguably one of the worst DPS heroes currently in the game. Well, whatever the case may be, Hammond eventually took care of them. But he wasn't done just yet. Once realizing how useless that Pharah is, their Mercy made the switch to Zenyatta, and me landing an icicle headshot was exactly what we needed to take them out. Following my call out, Hammond returned from his spawn camp to roll over the 1 HP Zen and then continue to pressure their second support. The enemy Ana tried desperately to survive, going as far as to wasting her ultimate in hopes of their Winston helping them out, but at last, the tiny hamster and the giant mech would prevail. Our team's cohesion and ult economy had improved drastically to the point where the final fight ended in a firework of ultimate abilities that made it impossible for the attackers to even stagger onto it. As much as I'm happy that we managed to hold it together, as we all know, anything can happen on 2CP, and needless to say that I still had a few questions for my team. We may have held until the second point, but there's no telling what kind of cheese comp we're going to face on offense. But objectives aside, I still wanted to know what the heck was up with that stack in my team. So, how many of you are stacking? Is it like the whole 5 stack?
4.
4, okay.
Who do you think is not in the stack?
That was a tough question. It obviously was not Sigma, because I already talked to him. My Baptiste's lack of pattern recognition was worrying, but not really telling. But there was one point where I called out to my soldier that a tracer was hiding behind him, and he did react to that call out even before we had this grand reveal, when previously nobody seemed to have listened to me at all. Maybe the soldier, Cerberus?
Yeah, you got it, dude. Bag us.
I don't know if you're memeing or not, dude. I'm a little confused there. At the end, I didn't get what I would have considered a clear answer, but I guess it didn't really matter too much. What did matter was making our way to the first point to continue our dominance over the red team. The defenders were setting up in interesting positions considering they knew full well I played Mei all round, and it was easy for me to catch the Reinhardt off guard. As much as he looked like he was having a mild seizure, he was lucky in the sense that not all of us were laying into him, allowing for his survival. But a lack of pattern recognition seems to be the norm in Diamond, since none of them made any effort to establish a position in which they can't get walled off quite as easily. This time, Reinhardt was feeling the brunt of our team's damage, which eventually led him to flee in panic. A move that will be punished by our soldier, who was more than ready to chase down those who break formation. It was easy pickings from here on out. The defenders were completely distraught as they witnessed their main tank hightail it out of the front line, and now there was nothing left for them to do but to retreat or submit to their inevitable doom. The objective was ours, and now all we had to do was take this confidence and bring it all the way to the second point. So long that nothing happens that could break our momentum, we would surely be able to take this game. How did my Zenyatta die so fast? Can I just highlight the fact that even with my Zen immediately headshotting the Sombra, he still did not have enough time to react before his moon-sized hitbox absorbed every single bullet coming out of Sombra's pea-shooter? Man, I really hope this doesn't end up being a bad omen. I mean, there's no way we're going to draw this game only because we lost our Zenyatta following the first cap. Right? GG's.
GG.
Nope, it didn't. Alright, granted, as far as gameplay is concerned, this was not the most exciting match ever. I just thought it was funny how I tried to shot call my team this entire match without getting a response just to learn that they were stacking in a voice chat elsewhere. I mean, honestly, if somebody got that fat EU experience, it was probably the red team. I can only assume what their voice channel sounded like when that Farah Smurf got spawn camped by her ball. Unfortunately, not every episode can make for an epic tale of redemption when I have to upload these videos on a weekly basis, but hey, I hope you enjoyed it anyway. So thank you everybody so much for watching. Don't forget to drop me a like on your way out if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to see more, and definitely hit that bell icon to not miss out on my next upload. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace! If there's one thing that Overwatch is known for, it's really bad balance, but it's also toxicity. Listen, toxic players in competitive games go hand in hand about as much as cookies and cream. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but having played competitive games for as long as I have, I simply know to adjust my expectations accordingly. To be entirely honest with you guys, blatant toxicity doesn't even bother me as much anymore. I simply couldn't care less about what makes somebody say mean things on the internet when ultimately I'm playing ranked in order to get some content. I mean, rank up. I totally care about ranking up. So as you can imagine, things get a bit more complicated when somebody's toxicity is interfering with my ability to win the game. It's one thing to spout dumb nonsense in voice chat, but it's another thing to be literally standing still in order to trash talk somebody in general chat because your mom didn't buy you a microphone for Christmas. But what if, in that same game, I come across somebody who actually watches my videos? I can't just be toxic in front of them when my entire mission on this channel is trying to spread positivity. I mean, I have done my fair share of toxic things on ranked, which means that this could be Jeff's way of having me repent for my sins. I guess it is time to combat toxicity with positivity, so sit back, relax, and let's get started, because our story today takes place on Blizzard Worlds. Now, some of you guys might be wondering what makes this game different from all the other toxic matches I played in so far, and the answer to that question is actually fairly simple. The skill rating average. Where most of my ranked stories have taken place in and around the diamond rank so far, a man can sit on his main account only for so long before he gets tired of all the smurfs. And what better way to deal with that problem than by smurfing yourself? Some of you might be asking why my ult account's MMR is higher than that of my main account, but that is a story for another day. All you have to know is that this is the first ranked game where somebody actually recognized me, which is quite the odd feeling for sure. Of course, the essence of good content are all natural and organic reactions, meaning it was in my best interest to not let on the fact that I was making a video. As such, we would begin our attack round without me acknowledging the text chat, while hoping that this isn't going to become detrimental to our chances for success. With the skill rating average being higher, everyone's playstyles would favor a more aggressive approach, and words cannot describe how much I was looking forward to that. Lucia was my hero of choice in an attempt of closing the distance quickly enough before soaking too much damage in the choke point, but true to my playstyle, I would not neglect the shot calling aspect. Let's push it. Go.
Wait, is that actually you, Cliff?
It was time for a diversion. No? That should do the trick. Our hamster friend over here may have recognized me, but more importantly than that was his gameplay. He perfectly synergized with our Tracer, who could make use of the space he created to start picking off the defenders, though at the cost of their own life. But even so, the advantage was on our side as we colored the kill feed red, and at this point it was obvious that our first attempt at capturing the objective was a successful one. Our Hammond aggressively pushed into the remaining survivors following my callouts, and while succeeding in staggering their Zarya, he just barely missed out on getting their Reinhardt as well. His elimination may have been unfortunate, but was all for a noble goal.
With asserted dominance.
As you should. Okay, that's how I know that he actually watched my videos, because feeding in the name of assertive dominance is something that I probably put on display on a regular basis. Either way, we were absolutely in business with no defenders remaining to stop us from capturing, and as such, we wasted no time to get the payload on the road. But of course, this wouldn't be a Masters game without an unjustified amount of aggressive flanking, so I decided to get myself into a sneaky position to catch somebody off guard. I called for some assistance to try and combo the enemy zenyatta, and like clockwork, my Hammond rolled in to do exactly that. My Reinhardt was clearly unhappy about being delegated to moving the payload, meaning victory be damned, he decided to join the party. As much as I appreciated my Reinhardt helping us out on the flank, I do have a hard time understanding what exactly he was attempting to shatter. But before I could even pose that question, the enemy Reinhardt came out of nowhere to smack me back to my spawn. Thankfully, my unexpected demise did not end up making too much of a difference, because not only did we do a fantastic job of keeping the enemy team staggered, we also had approximately 8.5 million ultimates at our disposal, and if you combine that with a lack of concept for the idea of ult economy, you know that the second point cap is gonna be ours. Our offense was going remarkably well, and we were not intending to let go off the gas. My Tracer was deeply committed to the hunting of bat spawns, and what kind of Reddit loser would I be if I didn't join them on the flank? The enemy Zarya stood no chance against our combined forces, and a quick toggle of the thanks voice line showed me that my Tracer appreciated the help, though I don't really understand why they didn't follow up on that elimination by continuing to chase down more survivors. Instead, Tracer had decided that they just wanted to stand still. Needless to say that this made her an easy target for the enemy soldier, who eliminated her before she could even hit a recall. I don't know why the heck they expected that to end any other way, but apparently they were very upset about the enemy team following up on an obvious misplay. Is that even considered a misplay? Don't you need to play the game in order to misplay? I mean, they were standing still. Of course, we still had more than enough players and confidence to continue our assault and make sure that our momentum remains unbroken. And much in the vein of our current formula to success, our Reinhardt made a point for smashing the Q button as soon as we charge ultimate to be the only right way to play the game. My Hammond and I did our best to be as disruptive as possible to the enemy team's attempt of regrouping, because Lord knows losing a fight just shy of the final point would spell doom for our team's morale. But to make sure that doesn't happen, our Genji busted out another Nano Blade, just that he had a bit more trouble confirming eliminations this time around. The enemy Zenyatta made use of our Genji's blunder to take him out, but just because we lost our Weeaboo doesn't mean we're done fighting. Hammond and I continued to shot call even though nobody else in our team said a word, and as we were bleeding manpower, we decided to step up a notch ourselves. You would assume that the minefield was only there to create space, but with me booping the enemies into it time and time again, it ended up being far more lethal than expected. And with that frog hamster combo on our side, victory on this attack round was ours. Man, we had one heck of an attack round. A+ shot calling? Check. Unwavering positivity? Check. Ult economy? Basically non-existent. My team's morale was at an all-time high, and I was feeling good about our performance, but it seemed like my Hammond still had some questions.
I don't know if I'm tripping or not. I swear it's you.
I mean, I am me. Just depends on your definition of me.
Okay, but if you're the guy on YouTube,
I do make Minecraft Let's Plays, they're kinda poppin'.
Yeah. But if you were the guy, like the Zen main thing, I watched some of the videos thing.
The Zen main thing, that's very descriptive.
Yeah.
Jokes aside, I was having a very pleasant conversation with the fella. Needless to say that I wasn't expecting something like this to happen when I queued up for rank, but he had a lot of nice things to say that I very much appreciated. I reckon that's what it feels like when somebody smashes a like button in voice chat. Either way, there was no more time for chit-chatting, because before we knew it, the round had started, and was our turn to prove that our defense was as good as our offense. As the enemies made their way past the choke point, my Hammond and Tracer were ready to prove that their cohesion wasn't just a fluke, jumping on the Zenyatta in the backline just in time to cut him off from the rest of the team. Not even a minute into their offense, the attackers were already completely dismantled without a clue as to whether they should commit to the push or take whoever survived and disengage. Of course, there was no choice to make in the first place, because our team continued to tear them apart. But the attackers wouldn't surrender without leaving their mark on our front line, as the enemy Reinhardt squished our main tank into submission before eventually falling himself as well. Annoyingly enough, the enemy Widowmaker made a swap to Echo. Needless to say that, being a vanilla hero, Widowmaker requires at least a modicum of effort to get value out of, which they failed to achieve. But them being on Echo means that no matter their level of competence, value was guaranteed. Now here is the big funny that I mentioned at the start of the video. Being a toxic douchebag, our Ana took time out of the day to start trash-talking said DPS player for doing poorly on the previous pick. The irony is that the enemy team was already flaming each other, because apparently their Zenyatta getting dove means that he is throwing the game. The fact that they told us to avoid him in chat clearly indicated that their team was already getting tilted out of their minds, meaning even without us adding fuel to the fire, we could have had a very easy defense against a team that obviously was not intending to play together. But naturally, Sir Douchington the First over here had to stand still and get fragged by the same player that they were talking smack about in chat. And because my Reinhardt and I were trying to cover for them, that created an opening for the enemy Reinhardt to land a massive shatter. That was all the attackers needed to start busting through our defenses, while their Echo was utilizing their hero's kit to its fullest broken extent. All of which could have been avoided just by not being toxic. But if you believe that this taught our Ana a lesson, you'd be grossly mistaken. But before we return to why our Ana was clearly in need of a hug, we had some teamfights to lose. As much as I respected my Reinhardt's chat energy, I don't know that I have ever seen the main tank get deleted as quickly as he just did. Our Genji was there with another Nano Blade to try and diffuse the enemy team's momentum, which definitely worked really well for a moment. But that victory was not meant to last, as our Tracer learned the difference between aggressive and reckless plays, eating a sleep dart behind enemy lines to kick off the very next teamfight. It was very apparent at this point that our team had a hard time winning teamfights without without investing ultimate abilities, which means that as soon as the next dry push commenced, my Reinhardt found himself cleanly wiped off the map once again. We were getting a taste of our own medicine, and let me tell you, it was not very pleasant. As much as we came out victorious in a few teamfights, none of these allowed us to establish a strong enough position to hold out a single push without ultimates. There is a lot more I could say about this round, but frankly speaking, that would just be me padding out what is already a fairly long episode. People's egos grow exponentially in size the higher their skill rating, and that even more so when they are playing on a smurf. The long and short of it is that, despite me and my Hammond's best effort of shot calling and flexing, we couldn't get our team to put aside their pride for a greater cause. My Ana immediately started flaming our second DPS as soon as the round was over, and it was in that moment that I realized this is not going to be an easy game. The irony that we are losing against a team that just one round earlier was already flaming one another definitely didn't go over my head. It was absolutely mind-blowing to me that our Genji-Ana duo invested all this energy to deliberately try and piss off our 2D when you would assume that we're still trying to somehow win this game. Not to mention that for a duo that might as well be AFK until they charge Nanoblade, they definitely had a lot of opinions about somebody else's gameplay. Of course I wasn't gonna say that to them, because if there's one thing I didn't want, it's losing this game for Sequoia. I couldn't care less about all these other nerds, but not only did he watch my videos, he was also playing really well while shot calling and staying positive. I felt that I owed him to at least try and keep this team functioning when clearly my gameplay alone is not gonna win this match. We got more than twice their bag and y'all stop flaming? Like Jesus, just chill.
True.
Yeah, that's all I got. And that's all we had time for anyway, because the blue team was in it to win it, and if they can carry over their confidence on the previous round, then I have a hard time believing that we even stand a chance. And judging by the gameplay, it definitely seemed like they had confidence in spades. Because our DPS were too busy arguing, the enemy team could get past the choke point without as much as a scratch on their armor, meaning they would take this teamfight to the point in no time at all. My Zarya was immediately overwhelmed by this push, and the rest of our team was left to figure out how we could stabilize. My soldier had gotten a very important pick on the enemy Ana before he had to retreat in response to a diving Winston, but thankfully I was right there to lay into him, and following those picks, I started raining disco ropes on the enemy team, who would end up being punished for their careless positioning. Zenyatta has such an incredibly powerful shot calling position, even just between Sequoia and I. Being able to punish enemy misplays thanks to our communication could be all we need to turn the tide. But of course, we couldn't go a single fight without my teammates utilizing the intermission in order to trash talk one another. We couldn't afford to let up now, and thankfully, my Ashe had successfully removed the enemy Ana from the teamfight once more. The only problem was that the same thing happened to our Ana as well. Things were beginning to heat up as overtime hit and the attacking McCree went on a massive Deadeye flank. I tried what I could to cut his line of sight, but I could only stay on high ground for so long before I had to get out of dodge. It was in one final act of defiance that the enemy Reinhardt brought down his hammer as he took his dying breath. Most of us are planted on the ground and there was no transcendence to save the day. Bullets, orbs, and hooks were being tossed about in the midst of battle, but within the chaos, there was only one hero who could save us. Bob. Bob was storming onto the battlefield in a flash, and in that very moment he was representing a pillar that could not be broken. All of our hope would rest on his heroic shoulders as he contested the objective while sending the attackers back to their spawn. In a game where player egos could not be bigger, it was ultimately an AI that saved the day and helped us hold onto the objective. Unfortunately, the blue team did get away with a tick and a half, meaning there was still some work to do before we can call ourselves victorious. I want you guys to realize we're winning this game while you're flaming. Imagine how easy this is if you stop. Is what I said, but do you want to hear a plot twist? One that I'm certain many of you have already figured out. All of our attempts of mediating were ultimately futile because none of these douchebags were in voice chat. Still wonder why I don't play on my main? Well, whatever the case may be, you have to make do with what you get, and people being in voice chat on EU is considered more of a luxury anyway. The bigger problem now was that, despite the fact that Kalashnikov was in voice chat, for some reason, he decided to take Hammond away from Sequoia, who up until now was doing a really good job on that hero. While that in itself wouldn't be the worst thing ever, the fact that he didn't at all seem to know how to play that character definitely was. And it most assuredly didn't help us that the enemy team swapped to Mercy Ashe, which, let's be real, that's just kinda cringe. Our first attack was immediately halted despite our best attempt, and so was our second one, as well as our third one. When our Ana wasted his nano boost despite his own E-boy only being a few percentage away from his ultimate, I legitimately started to lose hope. I mean, heck, nano blades were all that this duo was good for, and suddenly they can't even do that anymore? Just as I was about to throw the towel, a final act of defiance. Kalashnikov, determined to show that him taking Hammond away from Sequoia was not a throw, swung onto the objective to rain death and destruction onto the defenders. He had successfully split the blue team in half, allowing us to dogpile onto their isolated isolated Sigma and take him out. Utilizing a last bit of energy, Genji deflected a nano-boosted bullet straight into Mercer's cranium before pulling out a weepstick to do as much damage as he can without a nano-boost off his own. Sequoia put his carry pants on Roadhog as well and cleaned up whoever successfully dodged the Genji blade, and at last, we found ourselves on the objective. This game ended up being way more difficult than it had any right to, solely because some people decided to needlessly waste their time getting toxic in text chat, which, by the way, is about the most pathetic way to be toxic in the first place. But thankfully, none of that mattered anymore, because the game was over and we would finally be released from this lobby.
Yeah, but keep it up, man. Keep it up.
You too, man. Keep it positive. GG's. It sure is funny how I met one of the nicest players this season in one of the most toxic lobbies. For him to stay positive from start to finish, no matter how much people were butting heads, if anything, that should be an inspiration to the lot of us. Sadly, I cannot end this video off with a satisfying increase in skill rating because I'm still doing my placements, but hey, this game was definitely an experience and a half anyway. And if you guys enjoyed this episode, do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out, subscribe if you want to see more, and definitely hit that bell icon to not miss out on my next upload. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace! For all of you who just randomly stumbled upon this video, let me just make one thing clear. I'm not what somebody would call an expert. I dedicated a whole stories episode to how I didn't play ranked in 20 seasons while trying to climb my way back into Masters. Which raises the question, why the heck do I constantly end up in top 500 lobbies? Honestly, beats me. Our Lord and Savior Jeff Kaplan at some point decided that your MMR isn't something that should decay, meaning that for somebody like me who just barely got to 4,000 the last time he played, even 20 seasons later, the game believes I can continue to play in that rank. Combine that with the fact that EU players are fleeing to North American servers in hopes of improved communication, leaving my homeland barren and in dire need of players to fill out the queue, and we got ourselves a great tinfoil theory as to why this is happening to me. But things get a bit more exciting when said EU players are returning to their native ping, just to find out that Masters players have invaded their home ranking, and one such player is the Fran. While this isn't the first time that I ended up in a high elo game with a streamer, it is the first time that they are on the enemy team, and there had been heavy accusations of stream sniping. So we are going to do our investigative duty to find out if the Fran actually got stream sniped, while I'm trying not to embarrass myself in a lobby that I had no right being in. Ladies and gentlemen, our story today takes place on Hanamura. Now, just to adjust your expectations accordingly, this is not going to be your standard 2CP Stories episode. Everyone in this lobby was exponentially more competent than me, so needless to say that it ended up being, well, one of those types of games. In an attempt of not sabotaging this match any more than I am anyway, I submitted to starting this game off playing Brig, hoping that my double barrier running teammates aren't going to start complaining right out of the gate. Speaking of gate, the round had started and the attackers were on their way to show me what a top 500 lobby really plays like. And needless to say that I wouldn't be a Masters player without me finding a way to be the very first player to bite the dust. Man, what a bummer. Guess I'll have to get off Brig and switch to something that can come back to the point quickly. What a shame. While I was busy respawning, my teammates are trying the hardest not to immediately lose the point, and I gotta say, having competent DPS players is a very unique feeling to me, especially those that actually put their skills on display rather than just complaining in text chat all the time. But as much as they were fragging out, the lack of healing was really showing, and before we knew it, the attackers were in the process of planting their flag on the objective. Thankfully, my team was very actively communicating in voice chat, meaning as I rolled my way back out of our spawn, I already knew who I should target. The Baptiste was one-off lethal, and following that key pick, I felt confident that we might actually be able to stabilize our defense. But that feeling disappeared in a flash when Defran came back on Tracer to first delete my Baptiste and then hunt me down with a ferocity that made me feel like I was a rodent stealing vegetables on his farm. The only downside for him was that eliminating our support line came at the cost of all of his cooldowns, and with no health pack to top him off, my Sigma could easily avenge us. But naturally, there was a small price to pay as the rest of his team no longer had any opposition that could stop them from setting up on the objective. The first point was gone, but unlike the Smurf-infested Masters games I usually find myself in, nobody was complaining in voice chat. The difference between Masters and top 500 lobbies was very apparent to me at that point. In my usual games, players are smart enough to play aggressively, but not good enough to consistently punish others for overextending. And overextending is my second name. Meanwhile, in these games, I find myself immediately punished as soon as I do something wrong, while everyone is approaching the game in much more calculated fashion. Either way, really, I'm just trying to buy some time here because I have no idea how to narrate the special effects cluster truck that took place on the second point. A lot of ultimates were being tossed about, and when the dust settled, the defenders came out victorious. Well, besides one lonely farmer who came back just in time to watch his team get annihilated on the point. Defran decided to use this to his advantage by hiding in the mega health pack room so that he can strike once the time called for it. Getting a sticky bomb kill to start off the next team fight would make for a massive advantage, so he snuck around our backline ready to strike. Unfortunately, he waited just a little too long with our Echo coincidentally moving out the way the moment he tried to attack, and our Hanzo made that misplay even worse for him by sending him back to the spawn room. What was meant to create a tangible advantage for the attackers was now fully turned around, with my entire team aggressively pushing into the rest of their team. More than a team fight, this looked like absolute slaughter to me, but of course, in the eyes of those who are actually good at the game, this was nothing but a standard play. It is amazing how strong of a defense you can set up when your Masters Lucio player doesn't feed his brains out 15 seconds into a team fight. But don't be mistaken, all I did was speeding my team around. Usually I'm the one shot calling in my lower elo games, but it's not like I can tell these guys anything that they don't already know. When the next team fight came around, I diligently followed their callouts to dogpile onto whoever they wanted me to, while really the rest of my team was taking the reins when it comes to the actual fragging part of the equation. Victories came swiftly and easily as I sped my team off with the high ground when the attackers tried to hit us with the same widescreen TV plate that we set up on the previous fight. But rather than submitting space to the attackers, my team immediately turned it around to push right back into them. Speed, power, and momentum were all on our side as we bled time off the clock without giving their team as much as a chance to get on the objective. But naturally, the victor of this game was far from being decided. Where there's a will, there is a way, and nobody knows that better than Defran. As much as we lost the first point very quickly, our hold onto the second one remained unbroken, with every attempt of an assault failing at the early stages already. I mean, breaking a double barrier defense isn't easy at the best of times, but that is especially true for the second point on 2CP. As I sped my team into the attackers for what appeared to be yet another very easy team fight, none of us had realized that a certain somebody was missing. Until...
Wait, it can die.
C9, 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 C9.
Can someone touch?
Oh no.
Ow. It's fine. I have 1 minute.
Granted, I would agree if you said that it is Lucio's duty to be on C9 watch, considering his speed advantage, but in fairness, I was holding beat drop all round to counter their Sigma's gravitic flux, and I didn't want to be out of the team fight when he finally used it. I couldn't have known at the time that his usage of that ultimate would be completely inconsequential. And to be fair, Defran was actively using Tac Visor to make sure he wouldn't be stopped by the likes of a Squishy. So whether he's a mad genius or a brilliant strategist, whatever he did ended up being the perfect play they needed to win that round. And this, my friends, was only the beginning. For a team that just got C9'd out of their minds, my teammates sure remained very calm. I'm pretty sure if this happened to me in one of my usual games, everyone would be throwing a hissy fit and pointing fingers to find out whose fault it was that we didn't full hold. But these guys were stone cold professionals. No amount of Masters players in their teams was seemingly able to tilt them off their A game, and as such, our attack round commenced with no complaints whatsoever. You can really tell by the way my team is approaching this fight that rather than indiscriminately taping down the W key, they are looking for openings to exploit before full sending it down mid. Contrary to that, you could open a food bank with the amount of feeding that I was about to commence, because full sending it is the only way I know how to play the game. From Masters player to Masters player, this was my chance to prove myself and create an advantage early on in this team fight. I have dove many a zenyatta player in my time, and I was confident in being able to take on this one as well. Except, he's just better than me. Listen, this would have totally worked in Diamond. At least my inevitable feeding didn't come without some voice comms. I told my Echo where they could find the enemy zenyatta, and utilizing the broken hero's kit, he turned the old robot monk into a glorified recycling bin. But of course, we weren't the only ones making use of overpowered DLC heroes, and was none other than Defran who snuck up behind my team to equalize the engagement. As much as he tried to chase down Baptiste as well, few things are as powerful as immortality, meaning he also ended up taken out. I was already on my way back to the front line by the time all of that went down, and thanks to the power of highly caffeinated beverages and speed, I could join my teammates just in time to crush what little resistance was left on the point. It was a bit of a messy fight if you wanted to break it down, but I suppose the result speaks for itself, because our team assembled on the objective to secure the cap in no time at all. Of course, we weren't planning to get off the gas, but it was obvious at that point that the blue team was lacking agency that Defran tried to make up for by securing a vital pick on our Baptiste. Naturally, my entire team knew that they couldn't successfully assault point B without their main support backing them up, and in an attempt of not losing our momentum entirely, they decided to slow down. But going slow wasn't something that I was capable of, as I yeeted myself across the battlefield to go for what I assumed was a big brain play of pushing the enemy Sigma into my team, just just that my team was nowhere near me. Where this would usually be an inconsequential misplay in Diamond and Masters, I kind of forgot that top 500 hitscan players actually know how to land their shots, and as such, I felt myself eliminated. As much as what I did was a gross misplay, it gave the blue team a lot of confidence that prompted them to push into the rest of my team. Except my team was much better at handling that situation than they were on their offense. Rather than securing this team fight, they fed themselves into the grinder and somehow we came out on top. Talking about making the best out of your situation, my team immediately took the fight to the objective where, once again, a firework of ultimates pushed the blue team into a corner that they had a very hard time getting out of. Having learned absolutely nothing, of course I ran into the enemy backline once again, but the least I could do was disrupt their squishies. My number one priority was making sure that the rest of my team could continue doing their thing, and said thing would be much easier to achieve once I got rid of their bongo. While I didn't end up being much more than a glorified distraction, my team sure as heck wasn't bothered by any of that as they continued to showcase their obvious superiority, and at last, victory on this round was ours. But the really interesting thing about this was that, while we definitely lost point B in much more ridiculous fashion, for some reason the blue team didn't handle their loss quite as well. Now I'm not what one would call an avid Defran viewer, simply because I spent my entire time watching Echoflex instead, but last time I tuned into his stream, he was playing Bastion whenever he felt like the game was lost anyway. Needless to say that Bastion is a really bad pick outside a few cheese strats, meaning it isn't far-fetched to assume that he wasn't having a good time. Which really begs the question of, how the heck did we lose this round? Listen, as fun as it would be to try and post-rationalize how I managed to be the first one planted on the floor again, instead I would like to take this opportunity and talk about that. Yes, that. Apparently, somebody on my team was stream sniping, which really came as a surprise because if they were, they sure as heck didn't relay any useful information to the rest of the team. But let's find out what prompted Defran to make that accusation in the first place. So at one point during this attack round, in an attempt to contribute to his team's victory, Defran decided to head on over to our spawn to ensure that we couldn't continue contesting the first point. With him sitting there motionless, it would be easy to catch at least one player off guard before we realize that he's sitting there, but for some reason, Baptiste knew exactly what to expect. A stream sniper? Let's find out. So while Defran was making his way into enemy territory, he was fighting our Hammond who made a call out.
There's a Bastion in our spawn.
On top of that, Blizzard just recently fixed the broken audio in the game, meaning sound cues coming from your character, including footsteps, are now much more audible. But he was sitting still, you might say. Well, as you can see here, Defran was setting up into turret mode at the exact time that our Baptiste respawned, which is something that makes a considerable amount of noise. Without all of that context, it will be very easy to believe that he streams. Okay, never mind, he's definitely pulling up the stream right now. Alright, so there's strong evidence suggesting that at least one player on my team was sniping, which actually makes it even more sad that we got absolutely rolled that round. Anyway, I'm already 5 pages into the script and there are more rounds to go, so feel free to grab yourself a drink because we are nowhere near the end just yet. My team's game plan for this attack run was to avoid taking a full-blown team fight until we had some ultimates. That makes a lot of sense considering the fact that a fully pocketed Bastion defense is extraordinarily good at winning dry pushes. Of course, my hero of choice was not exactly ideal for a plan like that, and since Defran wasn't on Tracer, there really was no good reason for me to not play Zenyatta. I don't know exactly why I continued to play Lucio, but either way, it is what it is, and as such, we were sitting in the choke in an attempt of charging Baptiste's ultimates. Eventually, we slowly inched our way past the choke point as our bank of ultimates began reaching critical mass, because no amount of pressing Q is going to make a difference if we can't get into a position to use them effectively. Our Baptiste dropping his garage door meant go time, and because I have absolutely no concept of ability tracking, I tried to go for the enemy Orisa, who of course used the Fortify to avoid getting booped off. But the real victory here was the defender's use of ultimate abilities. Our investment in this teamfight was absolutely minimal, while all of them smashed the Q button indiscriminately, eventually ending up with none of them left in their bank. Having the speed advantage, of course our intention was to build on their misplay and return for another go as quickly as possible, but little did we know at that point that Defran's doing would play a very important role in our plan. I'm just gonna give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he was reading a donation or something. Since Defran was no longer there to keep us at bay, there was absolutely nothing stopping us from speed boosting onto the objective, where for the first time in this game, I finally began trying to find a balance between redditing and not feeding. I was absolutely itching to find an opening, but knew that I had to restrain myself. My patience would eventually be rewarded when I slit my way into their backline to take out both of their supports. My Baptiste became a casualty during this engagement, meaning once we had captured the objective, I went back to our old spawn to make sure he gets to join the fun. At least being a taxi isn't something I can mess up, but while I was escorting my Baptiste back to the rest of our team, the defenders were setting up yet another very special kind of defense. Thankfully, our Echo was sneaking about in their backline, and when they heard the stomping of a robot up on high, a callout was made that then later got confirmed by a sonic arrow. Obviously, Defran wouldn't expect to have the surprise factor on his side anyway, considering the fact that our Baptiste was definitely stream sniping, but at least I can safely say that we found found out about their plan without cheating. Needless to say that their defense setup didn't succeed thanks to our intel, and as was common practice in this match at that point, we captured the objective thanks to the use of many ultimate abilities that were aiming to crush their respawn advantage. It is moments like these that I'm really glad to be a YouTuber more than a streamer. Defran and his team must have gone full paranoid, because looking at their spawn in the replay, you can see them faking a dive comp before making a swap to double barrier at the very last second. I really wish he knew what was going on in our voice chat in the meantime, because our stream sniper had still not given us any useful information whatsoever, while all of us were discussing how we should be dealing with yet another Bastion offense. Not being aware of the impeding Symmetra play, you can guess how very surprised I was to find their entire team teleporting themselves right next to me as the roles of defender and attacker were being switched around. Thankfully, my Zenyatta experience absolutely dwarfs my Lucio playtime, meaning for once I wouldn't be the first one to bite the dust as my tanks rushed on over to contest the assault. Though I have to say that their thoughtfulness and patience really was that of top 500 players, because none of them needlessly tossed themselves at the objective when they didn't have to. Ultimately, all we did was bait out their cooldowns to create an opening for our Echo to fly in from behind and begin annihilating them from an angle they didn't expect. While we successfulully defended the objective, we did give them about 99% capture percentage in the process, and you can be certain that the attackers won't be satisfied with that. Defran came back with a vengeance, and me being a lonely Zenyatta player, of course I was his prime target, but thankfully he never managed to close the distance before being eliminated. The rest of his team, however, completed the dive that he tried to initiate, and there was no force in this universe powerful enough to allow me to stay alive. That desperate attack was their last chance at redemption, but sadly for them, my team was the one that stood on the point when the dust settled. But 99 capture percentage is nothing to sneeze at, meaning we had one last challenge to complete before we can call ourselves victorious. This game had gone on for far too long already. Nobody wants to be on the losing side at the end of a 25-minute 2CP match, and as such, there was nothing that fired us up quite like our hatred for the game mode we were forced to play. But of course, the defenders must have shared those feelings. They were fighting tooth and nail for that 99% cap, and with that, they managed to ensure that there would be no draw taking place today. If there's one thing I respected about this team, it's their tenacity. Their composition was built around punishing us for engaging, but instead, they turned the table around and aggressively pushed onto our Orisa. Was it not for our Baptiste Immortality field, chances are that we would have lost the game then and there, but alas, the defenders had no choice but to retreat. And with the clock ticking down dangerously quickly, it was time for the final team fights.
Nice pick.
Nice, good, just play slow.
Play slow.
No rule, no rule.
We've got 10 seconds after the go.
Run one.
Echo, you need to touch.
Me.
Can someone touch here?
Echo.
Pick one. Nice. McCree left side.
It is safe to say that this was the least chaotic final fight of a round we had this entire game. It wasn't bombastic and epic to any capacity, but instead strict and calculated, with us winning on the back of exploiting the defenders' mistakes more than making flashy plays. At the time of playing, I was relieved to end off another top 500 game without being the reason we lost, but now that I'm making this video, in hindsight, this victory was definitely soured thanks to our stream sniper. I highly doubt that Defran and his viewers would have the patience to sit through such a long and boring video, and I doubt he even remembers this match, but if he does end up seeing it, at least know that the guy stream sniping on our team definitely didn't do it to give us an advantage. He was clearly just trying to mess with you. Well, I doubt that makes it better, but anyway. You could argue that what he did was inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, especially because he didn't tell us anything useful at all, but that doesn't really make it better for me. I definitely feel bad for streamers who have to deal with things like that on a daily basis, but ultimately, this is how our story ends. And hey, if you enjoyed this one, then do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out. Consider subscribing if you want to see more, and definitely hit that bell icon to not miss out on my next upload. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace! If there's one thing I learned while making these Overwatch ranked stories, it's that a lot of you guys want to rank up much more badly than I do. And another thing is that some of you, not all, just some, don't have the greatest sense of judgment. If we take a minute to really be honest with ourselves, I think we can agree that none of us always fire on all cylinders. There are 100 things we can point at to explain why we're underperforming before we are willing to admit that we're just not as good as we thought we are. And considering the fact that Overwatch is a team game, we always got 5 other players we can blame for a loss anyway. Something a lot of you guys probably didn't know is that back in Season 2, when Blizzard introduced the ranked system as we know it today, I placed them Platinum. I fought my way into Diamond during that same season before reaching Masters in the next one, and just another one later, during Season 4, I hit Grandmaster for the first time ever. And my secret at the time, as much as now, is reviewing my own gameplay. Needless to say that 4 years ago, nobody watched my videos other than myself, but the fact that I did make videos allowed me to relive all of my mistakes, rather than being blissfully ignorant about them. I didn't have a choice but to to admit that I was bad at the game when I was looking at the evidence while editing. But the first step to improving is understanding that there's something worth improving at. So today's video is going to have a bit more of an educational flair. See it as a VOD review with extra steps. While we are going to recite the events of my last placement match on my old account, finally lifting the secret behind what rank the game believes I should be in, I'm also going to try and post-rationalize my mistakes so that hopefully you guys can learn from them. We are also going to take a look at voice comps and what you can take away from them, as well as a lot of other things that I believe can help you rank up. This seems like a fitting way to end off 2020, because just like this year was a nightmare to deal with, so is competitive play in Overwatch. But if we can all learn something from it, maybe we can start off the next year as better players and better people. Now without further ado, our story today takes place on Busan. A common theme you will find in these games is that, being true to my word, I try to flex on my team and play characters that aren't usually very popular. Of course, many players consider Brigitte a must-pick in the current meta, and as such, I won't get around playing her, especially on a map that she absolutely excels at. And since this was my first game of the day, I didn't actually mind playing a hero that isn't quite as demanding. But to my surprise, my second support asked me to play the other meta support hero. I'm not, like, really good at it, but I can.
Okay, I'll play buff,
Okay. Honestly, I found that hint of fearful regret in his voice absolutely hilarious. I'm pretty sure at that point he expected me to be a Brig one-trick or something, and immediately changed his mind about having me play something else. Going to the first team fight, you can watch my brain turn to mush in real time. I have a big problem with staying focused on playing characters I find boring, and considering the fact that you can get away with taping down your W key in Diamond, I never really had to think about what I'm doing on this hero. But as you can see in slow motion, my Reinhardt backed out while being critically low on HP, which should have been a great reason for me to play more carefully. But of course I didn't, and I paid the price for it. I mean, heck, he even announced his play in voice chat, so there was no excuse for my misplay other than sheer incompetence. The lack of healing immediately caught up to us as the enemy Echo began tearing through our front line, really driving home the importance of self-preservation. That initial victory on Mecha base allowed the enemies not only to get the first cap, but also to set up a choke point defense. A lot of compositions are going to have a hard time getting past this, but thankfully the enemy team didn't have enough poke damage to stop us from closing the distance. And them holding so close meant that once we were in melee range, I would have no trouble getting my Inspire going, which adds a lot of survivability to my team. As far as basic plays are concerned, I think piling onto the enemy Sigma after having cancelled his grasp was a good idea, especially since I was very vocal in voice chat about it. But once again, I was stepping in front of my tanks to lead the charge, not realizing that my Reinhardt was losing the main tank battle behind me. A teamfight like this can still be salvaged. I mean, it's not the prettiest thing ever, but as long as you can do enough damage for the rest of your team to start cleaning house, there is a good chance to win. Our ticket to victory in this case was the fact that the enemy team's positioning was about as questionable as their use of ultimates. Players will often get a confidence boost when winning the first fight, especially when set win came very easily. It is important not to underestimate your opponents and start wasting cooldowns and ultimates in hopes of being a hero. The enemy team came back via the high ground route, while my team chose the underground path in order to set up on the objective. If their Lucio went for a reset rather than a backline feed, that play could have worked out as they could use the high ground to poke us off of the objective. But now we had the man advantage and, lag spikes aside, successfully captured the point. Now please don't ever do what this Echo is doing right here. Their entire team is still respawning, they are obviously not trying to aggressively secure a pick, and whatever amount of poke damage they do is completely useless because they already have their ultimate, whereas that damage is feeding our support ultimates. When you do this, you are needlessly risking getting staggered while exclusively benefiting the enemy team. Our Genji saw an opportunity to actually secure that kill, which wouldn't be a bad idea if he chased any other hero, but Echo has unrivaled mobility that allowed him to get away, while our Genji got caught by their respawning teammates. At least our soldier eventually found her to equalize the engagement. Unfortunately, we didn't get to hold onto the objective for a long time, because that deep into a match, both teams have a lot of ultimates at their disposal to make dry pushers a thing of the past. Though it is worth highlighting that the enemy team grossly overcommitted with their ultimates. Essentially, they used everything they had except for Shatter, when just having eliminated me on Brig with their Flux would have probably been enough. I do understand them using Sound Barrier to counter our Gravitic Flux, though we were already 2-man down and our tanks were low on HP, so they could have probably done without it. And when the enemy Echo decided to toss their ultimates into the mix as well, we all knew that the next teamfight should definitely be ours, even if we lost the objective for now. Here you can see really well that every match of Overwatch is composed of a lot of small decisions you make in a very short period of time. My team was calling to group up for a right side push, while my support instinct was telling me that I might be able to save my Genji, who was in the process of getting staggered. The right decision here would have been to stick around the left side to toss my Genji a healing pack, because I actually had full confidence in him being able to get out. And the enemy team didn't have any long range bursts to punish me for that position. But since I haven't played a lot of ranked in a really long time, I submitted to listening to the rest of my team, which did eventually cost my Genji his life. That meant we had to engage the next teamfight without our second DPS, which, well, I'm just gonna let this one play out.
Left side. I haven't.
Kill Ryan, kill Ryan! Oh my god, no way.
Ryan's still low. You can get Ryan, nice.
Nice.
They waste some mortality, no mortality.
We better go point here as well.
Up one.
Lucian. Above you, Genji.
No more ults.
No, it's just Sigma point.
Good one.
McCree. Nice.
Good job. I think there's a lot you can take away from this clip, particularly the voice comms. You will notice that we immediately called out the enemy Reinhardt as an obvious weak point, and since I had my rally up, I could actually just walk into him to smash him through his barrier. Calling out crucial cooldowns like them having wasted immortality with no good benefit is also important because it means you can press the advantage more aggressively. Another really important callout was no more ults, making sure that, contrary to the enemy team, we don't waste more than the necessary. And once the teamfight was won, just letting everyone know they did a good job is great for team morale. Something like nice or well done can already do the trick. Believe it or not, I won more games on the back of good voice comms than through mechanical skill. In fact, I believe that a carry attitude is more detrimental than helpful to your chances of ranking up. The next teamfight was not as clean as the previous one because our voice comms got a bit messy. We weren't in agreement about whether or not we should engage early, and the disparity in aggression between my tank line and me was once again very apparent. It sounds like a joke, but I really meant it when I said in the previous video, it doesn't matter if you are feeding as long as you are feeding as a team. And me not prioritizing my own life while playing Brig can actually end up being a huge detriment to the rest of my team. But only because a teamfight gets messy doesn't mean you can't win it. The enemy Baptiste continued to waste his ultimate just for him to get some inconsequential damage out, and my Sigma was putting a masterclass in positioning on display, as far as Masters players are concerned anyway, and thanks to my Baptiste staying alive, he could spend his time keeping my Sigma alive who continued to pressure the opposition. Since the capture progress had reached 90% in our favor, a scrappy teamfight like this actually benefited us more than the enemies. I preemptively armor packed my Baptiste so he can continue healing our tanks, but when I saw the enemy Hammond going for my soldier, I knew that had to take priority. There is not a dang thing you can do as a soldier when getting juggled by a Hammond, so you hugely rely on your team helping you out. The enemy team needed a cohesive approach to take the objective, but them splitting to take two separate fights really just played into our cards. Our tanks on high ground stopped their team from touching the objective, and any solo diving attempts were immediately halted by the fact that Brigitte is an anti-diving character. The first round was ours, and if you were hoping for me to play characters other than Brig, then this might be your lucky day, because as fate would have it, my teammates had no problem with me swapping in the next round. Playing in higher elo games definitely feels a lot like gambling. You can tell your teammates are confident in their abilities when they advocate for everyone to play their strongest pick, meta be damned, whereas them insisting to adhere to the meta is usually not the greatest sign. But knowing that I hadn't put up the best of performances on the last round, I wasn't gonna make that decision on my own. Do you want Lucio or Brig here?
Whatever you want, bro.
I wasn't gonna let him tell me twice. This part of Busan really lends itself to snipers, and as such, I found myself having more success on Lucio in the past. It appeared the enemy team had a similar approach, although with a lack of cohesion. One of their tanks decided to kick the round off playing Roadhog, and that while committing to a very deep flank. Of course, I spotted him and immediately called it out, allowing us to avoid getting picked off right from the get-go. And as much as I was knocking the enemy team's cohesion, they did turn around to try and help their flanking hog, though that did put them in a bad position in which they had no choice but to retreat. My Reinhardt asked me to go cap the point while they were holding the front line, but the enemy Tracer was trying to delay the inevitable as much as possible. Thanks to my Baptiste, I wasn't really in any danger, while that Tracer had to weigh the importance of their stall against the value of their own life. But our position was definitely stronger than theirs, and with our flag firmly planted on the ground, my Genji found an opening to start cleaning house. As soon as our Genji opened up the fight, our tanks made the call to aggressively push for more staggers, and we wouldn't miss out on an opportunity to charge our ultimates utilizing the enemy Roadhog. Here's a bit of a tip for those of you who maybe don't play a lot of Lucio. When an enemy is running away, try to use your speed to get in front of them so that you can boop them back into your team rather than just booping randomly for extra damage. My team understood the importance of chasing staggers because not only does it buy you extra time on the clock, but sometimes it forces the enemy team into making mistakes, such as using an ultimate in their spawn. As you can see, that ended up being completely inconsequential for us, and trading a few seconds worth of capture percentage for a high impact ultimate was definitely worth it. The enemy team bought themselves a bit of space to regroup and form an attack, but our team wouldn't just sit there idly for them to do so.
I will blade this now. Can you guys go in?
6 to the right side. Sigma.
That one.
6 actually.
This might seem odd, but try not to do what I just did here. Baptiste does a lot of damage, and simply charging into him head-on is going to get you killed more often than not when they are more competent than you. Also, the guy was paddling back towards his spawn in an alleyway that my team had no line of sight to, meaning my callouts really just clogged up the voice chat for no reason. Considering this was a high Masters lobby and not an Overwatch League scrim, mistakes like these are expected to happen. Nobody plays perfectly, but considering the rank we are in, this was a very clean engagement with a very clean disengage. If I had to give it a guess, I would assume that the enemy team was either lacking voice comms or they weren't on the same page about how to take these fights, which is something that happens a lot in this game mode when losing the first round. If you ever find yourself on that side of the coin, try to make sure that you continue to call the shots with confidence to give your team a sense of the game still being winnable. Anyway, only because you're winning doesn't mean you can't make mistakes, and the following play is going to illustrate that. My Baptiste had announced in voice chat that he was about to drop his widescreen TV, which was bound to buy us more time on the clock as it should stop the enemy team from pushing through main. But for some reason, I thought we were in last fight territory, so my idea was to initiate an aggressive push with my beat drop. Needless to say that utilizing that beat drop would require my team to speed past the matrix that my Baptiste just put up, but even more importantly than that, this was not the last team fight! To top the whole thing off, I did not communicate my intention behind this play, while my Baptiste did, meaning my whole team gave me the very appropriate reaction of, They definitely tried to make the best of it by playing as aggressively as possible to at least get some ultimates of the enemy team, but needless to say that we lost this fight just because my brain completely shut off. You see, it is important to own up to your misplays and understand why you did what you did. Small mistakes can be forgiven since this was my first game of the day, but a blunder like that really should not happen in Masters. There was one saving grace though, because the enemy Baptiste would stick to his meme and keep using his ultimate at the least appropriate times possible. If you have been paying attention to this video long enough to end up so far into it, then surely you have already realized that my team is simply better than the enemy team. That's not to say they didn't have a chance to win, but this appeared to have been a voice comm diff because their team play just couldn't measure up against our cohesion, even if said cohesion was that of Masters players. And while you watch us win this final team fight on the back of very basic plays, let me just say that I always see a bunch of comments from people that really don't seem to have a good idea of how skilled their teammates should be. It's absolutely hilarious to me when I read a comment saying that guy looks like a gold player when they're actually displaying average Masters gameplay. But then they end their commentary praising a Smurf because apparently to be playing in Masters you need to be as good as a Grandmaster. All I'm saying is, if you never reviewed your own gameplay with honesty, you'll be surprised to see yourself make the same and even more mistakes than those that you criticize in the comment section. As I said at the start of the video, nobody always fires on all cylinders in every single game at every day of the week. We all make mistakes, and the best thing we can do is try to learn from them. With that said, I definitely should not be in 3800 right now, because I'm most certainly making way too many mistakes for that rank. And it also doesn't help that I accidentally climbed into 3900 by now. Listen, I know this video was a bit uneventful, but after that behemoth of an episode I crunched to get done in time for Christmas, I hope you can forgive me. I could have tried to play some more Overwatch throughout the Christmas weekend to get a better game, but I mean, why would I want to ruin my holidays by playing ranked? Jokes aside, I'm certain you can understand. Anyway, thank you everybody so much for sticking around. I very much appreciate each and every one of you. If you did enjoy the video, then do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out. Consider subscribing if you want to see more, and remember, you can't change the people around you, but you can always work on yourself. That is not only true for Overwatch, but also real life. Thanks again everybody, and here's to a successful 2021. You're actually complete garbage, and you're trying to tell other people to play the game. That is the worst part about it. You're one-tricking a trash hero, and you're trying to tell others how to play the game. If you ever wanted a surefire recipe for disaster, then look no further. Competitive play in Overwatch can be annoying enough as is, but things get so much worse at the end of the season. The last few days of ranked play are like an unstoppable force of nature. No matter what you do, chances are you're going to have a really bad time. But because this game was created much less as a fun pastime and much more so as a social experiment, Jeff decided to introduce the flex queue system that allows absolute degenerates to throw games on tank in order to be rewarded a priority pass that then allows them to continue throwing games on DPS, except with a shorter queue time. And I am one such degenerate. Hey listen, I read comments about how some people would love to see me play roles other than support, and who am I to deny their request? Don't blame me for using a broken system, blame the devs for thinking it was a good idea to introduce it. With that said, I always have this nagging feeling at the back of my mind that my DPS videos are kinda boring, so if you want to see my last Playsome match on DPS to find out where I placed, consider letting me know by dropping a like on this video and sounding off off in the comments. I just feel like because my support is stronger than my DPS that me off-rolling can end up a bit underwhelming, but if you guys want to see it then I'll get to working on that video. Anyway, leading up to set DPS placement, of course I wanted to get some priority passes in order to shorten my queue time, and boy howdy if that wasn't ever the worst decision I have ever made. I'm usually all about highlighting the positive aspects of Overwatch and show you guys how I can still end up having fun even in a meta that is widely considered to be awful. But never did I expect things to turn out so horribly when I hit that Q button. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to see my mental state deteriorate in real time as our story today takes us back to Rialto. Wait, have we ever had a full-blown episode on Rialto? Now, I will be the first to admit that tank isn't exactly my strongest role. I really enjoy playing characters that allow you to tape down your W key like Winston and Reinhardt, but considering the fact that neither of them can match up to the prowess of DLC heroes, of course I wouldn't get to play them. And because it is the end of the season, naturally my second tank wouldn't hesitate to insta-lock Roadhog, killing any hope of me having fun in this game. I try to avoid playing Sigma whenever I can because my experience on that hero is literally in the single-digit hours, meaning I'd be giving Hammond a shot instead. I was really hoping to finally be able to escape the dreaded double barrier meta by not queuing on my strongest role, but apparently Diamond players are just as desperate for SR at the end of the season as anyone else. But it would be very out of character for me to give up before the game even started, so I was hiding in the shadows waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The enemy Sigma was well out of position without my meddling, but it felt good knowing that my boop would be the final nail in the coffin that sent him back to the spawn. Our defense was off to a great start, and I figured that with an opening such as that, I might be able to catch the enemy Zenyatta off guard much like their Sigma. The plan may have been sound, but between an Orisa pull, a Discord orb, a sleep dart, and a flash hammer combo, I was very swiftly made aware of the fact that I shouldn't be playing Hammond at my current skill level. Running what is essentially a quad DPS comp is great when everybody knows how to play their heroes of choice, but since my Roadhog didn't seem to want to swap to a real tank, I had no choice but to play the only hero that has 2 characters worth of abilities in this kit. Needless to say that, whether you put me on Hammond or Sigma, I wasn't going to wow anybody with my performance, but the rest of my team was willfully unimpressed by the fact that they had nobody to protect them and continued to frontline as if they had 2 barriers in their faces. That misplaced confidence would lead to a number of very avoidable eliminations which continued to weaken our position. I tried my best to hold the front line, but things get a bit wild when there's no pressure on any part of the enemy composition. While I'm flinging between stopping their DPS, I'm shredding my supports and trying to hold my own against both of their tanks. My Mercy's resurrection allowed my Torbjorn to remind us that we are playing in Diamond because apparently nobody knew how to step out of the glowing hot magma that he spastically covered the floor in before dying once again. Of course, that smurfing Genji wouldn't fall victim to a Diamond play like that as he pulled out his weep stick to secure the point. The only way to break all the momentum the red team had accumulated was by getting a full reset, meaning the worst thing that could happen now was getting staggered. Our Mercy understood that very well, and it was obvious that she was trying to get out, but our Torbjorn wholeheartedly disagreed with that notion and was determined to get that ultimate back that he used on the last fight, even if it meant that he was going to die in the process. And trust me, dying he did. At least Mercy had survived long enough to be able to regroup with the rest of us, and with every competent player on the team assembled, we decided to try and retake the objective. Our Pharah secured a strong entry into this fight as she successfully picked off the enemy Zenyatta, but as much as the sky remained uncontested, the frontline was not looking quite as strong. I had the brilliant idea to try and toss a rock at the enemy Orisa, but then got deleted so unbelievably quickly that I didn't even have time to regret that decision. Thankfully, the rest of my team did just fine without me, because if there's one thing more powerful than team play, it's unapologetically flanking while indiscriminately slamming down on the Q button. The only one who survived the special effects vomit was the enemy Genji, and we would soon learn that allowing him to get away was a big mistake. The red team was allowed a full reset leading into another teamfight at the blink of an eye, and as it turned out, our composition was very bad at handling nanoblades, allowing for more progress on the objective. There was an attempt at recontesting, but trying to fight a double barrier composition while only having a single barrier off your own is already rather difficult, though it definitely doesn't help when your Torbjorn decides that his face is going to make for a substitute for that missing shield. The enemy team continued to tear us apart as the card made more and more progress. Simple ultimate combos would be our downfall time and time again, while nobody on my team seemed to be willing to swap off their hero to give us a fighting chance. But not all hope was lost, because our Roadhog was still alive and he managed to buy us some time as well as space, while my Mercy brought me back to the land of the living to continue suffering once more. Although these plays meant that we never fully reset, but since our spawn was right behind us, every elimination we got now was suddenly much more valuable than before. Trading 1 for 1 would be a favorable transaction for us as the attackers had a long way to the objective, meaning at last the 2CP on wheels nature would reel its ugly head, allowing us to stay in the game. And because I I am a video game warlord prodigy, it only took that long for me to warm up on a hero that I've barely ever played. My game sense heightened and my mechanics followed suit as I put a yet unprecedented Sigma performance on display, and with my godlike gameplay at the forefront, we would continue to bleed time off the clock. Since I am a zenyatta main, it really wasn't far-fetched to suggest that I would also do well on Sigma. After all, both of them are floating characters that wield the power of balls to beat their enemies into submission. But as we all know, confidence is a flimsy shield, and it was that dominating performance that led me to push too far with the intention of using my ultimate early, while severely underestimating the amount of damage that the enemies had at their disposal. Since I was the only player on our team that wasn't constantly flanking, me getting eliminated meant that nobody on my team would contest the card. Our defense was broken and it was now our time to attack, though it is a dang shame that we didn't manage to full halt. If you have been paying any attention at all, you'll know that I was not having a great time in this match. I mean, heck, I wasn't even supposed to care about it. All I wanted was to get my priority pass so that I can finish my DPS placement, and instead, I felt like I was the only one on my team who was actually interested in team play. I had already given up on any of my teammates changing either their heroes or their playstyle, and since my Sigma experience was so limited, I wouldn't be able to deliver the carry performance that a composition like this needed. I suppose there's no reason to complain about it. I won't be able to get myself to not care about a ranked match even at the end of the season, as much as I won't be able to get my Torbjorn to stop frontlining. With that said, spamming insane amounts of damage down the choke point was eventually about to net him an elimination, and in this case, the timing couldn't have been any better. The only unfortunate thing is that as soon as he did something useful, he had to compensate for it by running it down mid again. Thankfully, the damage was already done. Our team had all the space in the world to maneuver as we pleased, and for what I believe to be the first time in this match, Roadhog and I were building a frontline. I mean, in fairness, that frontline hastily decided to take a fight on the flank rather than actually being on the objective, but hey, at that point I prefer having anyone next to me than dying on the card on my own time and time again. Contrary to my team, the enemies understood the concept of staggering, which their Orisa tried to avoid by resetting. Their Ashe was under the impression I could still get out, but my Roadhog wholeheartedly disagreed with that idea. Momentum was on our side now, and my teammates decided to push up to secure as much space as possible, but if you believe that a whole round of frontline deaths would cause my Torbjorn to stop playing more smartly, then you'd unfortunately be mistaken. Our lack of team play continued to be our downfall as we failed to make use of our strong position, and the red team came back swinging to show us how this game was meant to be played. There really isn't much I can say that I haven't already said. I called for us to regroup, but my Torbjorn didn't care as he continued to frontline to his heart's content. Another big problem was that, for some reason, the enemy team always had a bunch of ultimates to toss at us in every single team fight, and it was obvious that they knew how to use them much better than us. The cherry on top of this disaster that we call an attack round was the fact that everybody stubbornly stuck to their heroes while the enemy team made very crucial swaps to shut us down. Small smooth brain players would tell their follower to swap because the enemy team was running double hit scan Mercy, but being the big-brained individual that I am, I politely asked my follower to go McCree in order to shut down the enemy ball. But I wasn't the only one asking for a swap. Our Torbjorn, of all people, asked me if I could swap off Sigma, and, well, just listen in on that yourself.
Can you switch your Sigma, please?
To what? Suggestions?
Like Zarya or Monkey.
Monkey's the worst tank in the game, what are you talking about? The worst kind of moron is one that speaks with conviction of a subject they clearly know nothing about. The condescending tone in his voice was already very telling, but when he suggested me to swap off the strongest tank in the game to either the weakest one in the roster, or another off tank to complement our Roadhog, really showed me that this guy had no idea what the heck he was doing. I mean, really, all those frontline deaths should have been a clear indication of that anyway. But all of that bickering between Torbjorn and me really worked in our Roadhog's favor, because true to his name, he was absolutely throwing for content in the least subtle way possible. I mean, it would be hypocritical of me to judge him for that, because honestly, I've done things like that myself, and out live I said that seeing this in the replay didn't get a chuckle out of me. Hey, the content ain't gonna get itself, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, it took me working on this video to understand why the enemy team always had so many ultimates at their disposal, and needless to say that this was making the game much more difficult. However, we weren't done fighting yet. Faura actually took my suggestion and made the swap to McCree, which immediately allowed us to punish the enemy Hammond rather than wasting time chasing him. We eliminated him so quickly that the enemy team couldn't even react to it, giving us an opening to use all of the ultimates that we've been holding on to. After having been held on the second point for so long, that simple hero switch gave us a second wind unlike any other. Despite my Sigma gameplay failing to carry our team due to sheer inadequacy, despite my Roadhog feeding the enemies every single ultimate in the game 5 times over, and despite despite my Torbjorn continuing to do less damage than his turret, our McCree, with the help of our supports, somehow successfully pushed us all the way to the end in overtime, allowing us to fight for the win one last time. This was it, our final chance to put ourselves in a winning position. The moment these doors open, every single mistake is going to be that much more detrimental, and every last bit of distance covered is going to be that much more valuable. As is custom during situations like these, the first engagement will be a calm and calculated one, with every team waiting to find an opening. The moment one team loses a player, it meant go time for the opposition to try and capitalize on it. Junk above us.
Kill him, kill him.
I got no barrier. 3 half. Nice hook. Free right side, free right side. Dude, nice one. The fight was going much in our favor. Everybody was showing the restraint not to push our luck too far while we continued to pick the enemies off one by one. We gassed ourselves up for every kill we collected to keep our morale as high as possible, but the red team wasn't out of the game just yet. Despite us putting our differences aside for the sake of victory, the enemy's team play was still far superior to ours. It didn't take any insane carry performances more than it took simple combos to start tearing us apart. But either way, we had pushed the card very far for a team that really should have lost in the previous round. Though attacking is one thing, we still had to make use of all that space we covered by stopping the enemies from surpassing us. After spending 20 minutes in this lobby, nobody was willing to just give up the crown. It was time for a victory royale, and whether we deserved to have it or not, we weren't just gonna hand it to the red team without a fight. The start to this round was much more explosive than the previous one. Opting for a Hammond over an Orisa, the red team was trying to find an opening without the prerequisite poking, while my Roadhog was going for a bold hooking attempt over a more safe playstyle. Their Hammond was eventually taken care of, but that aggressive playstyle of theirs was backed up by a truckload of damage that got me killed first and had my teammates follow shortly after. Every Platinum player knows that the worst thing you can do in an overtime push like that is needlessly throwing yourself on the objective. All we had to do was win a single fight, so we should stay back and charge our ultimates rather than...
Let's go, Sigma, let's go!
What are you talking about? What bridge are you talking about? Why do you want to hold here? They're gonna boop us off like a ball. Now, I'm the last person to say I told you so, but, well, it came exactly as I predicted. We needlessly fed ourselves into the grinder, wasting ultimates in the choke point that was simultaneously Boop City. There was no way for us to escape the minefield, and as such, we all found ourselves eliminated. Granted, as ridiculously stupid as my Torbjorn's idea was, the enemy Hammond probably wouldn't have had a minefield to use on us in the first place if it wasn't for my Roadhog once again outflanking as a walking ult battery to literally hand it to him. My frustration for the end of season in general and this match in particular was piling up, but there was enough time to complain after the game was over, so for now, I wanted to make sure that we were still the ones to take home the victory, though it seemed like my Torbjorn didn't share that notion.
No ult for Sigma, stupid bot.
Bro, you have no idea what you're talking about. You one-trick Torb, you have no idea about tanking.
Quick. Q1, huge.
She flux.
98.
Let's see half.
For one.
Get the ball.
Nice.
Dude, Torb, don't ever open your mouth. Holy crap, man. You wanted me to go Winston. He's literally the worst character in the game. You're like, Sigma's bad. Yo, guys, let's hold on the bridge against the Bullwick and boop us off, and he has mines. No, who cares about choke points? Also, you ran in front of the tanks all game long. You're actually complete garbage, and you're trying to tell other people to play the game. That is the worst part about it. You're one-tricking a trash hero, and you're trying to tell others to play the game. And you're doing it poorly. At least do it well. Alright, you're bad. It's cool. You're actually trash. Don't tell others to play the game, dude. You have no idea. Well, I suppose that concludes the episode. And not to break the fourth wall or anything, especially after you sat through this entire video just to get to this part, but there may have been a bit of acting involved in that one. Just to be clear, I meant everything I said to him. I'm not just gonna sit there and let some hard-stuck diamond Torbjorn want to berate me about things he has no idea about. But I probably wouldn't have dignified his nonsense with a response if it wasn't for the sake of content. I'm certain the moment I said, you're one-tricking a trash hero, you already caught onto me just making this up as I go, because every high elo player should know that Torb is actually disgustingly overtuned right now. As much as I'm trying to make a more positive impact with my videos, I'm actually a horribly toxic player myself. Though if I was actually angry at that guy, you would have heard me swear like a sailor. So fine, yes, I knew full well at the time that I was going to turn that match into a video, and I figured that shouting at the Torbjorn one-trick that felt the need to tell me how to play the game after feeding all match long would have made for a good ending. The unsung heroes of this match were my Pharah as well as my two supports. While Roadhog, Torb, and I only occasionally popped off while constantly feeding, all of them put up a solid solid performance from start to finish. I mean, heck, my Torbjorn collected like 19 or 20 deaths by the end of this. At least I only get up to 16. Well, it looks like we're not so different, you and I. Anyway, thank you everybody so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out. Consider subscribing if you want to see more, and definitely ring that bell icon to not miss out on my next video. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and don't be as toxic as me, alright? Peace. Can you imagine if being bad at Overwatch was a bannable offense? I mean, we all have bad games, bad days, and bad YouTube channels, but just imagine if a slip-up like that could cost you your account. Thankfully, in the world that we live in, just being bad at the game cannot get you banned, and as such, throwing connoisseurs like myself have devised numerous ways of losing their matches. But there is an art to the madness, because the hallmark of throwing in Overwatch is doing so without anybody noticing. It is really easy to tell when something is going wrong in this game, but it's not always that easy to come up with an idea on how to fix it. Since tanks, DPS, and supports all see the game through different lenses, chances are they all perceive the real problem to be something else, though chances are that I am the problem. If you've been keeping up with my series of ranked videos, you will know that Jeff has placed me in order of magnitude higher than I realistically should be after a 20-season-long break from competitive play. Needless to say that competing in a rank that's higher than what you can handle can easily make you the weak link, but we haven't yet discovered if the same's the case for my other roles, though we did get a bit of a glimpse on our last episode. It isn't often anymore that things happen in Overwatch that could really tick me off. After having played this game for so many years, you would assume that I've already seen it all, but somehow we came across a Torb 1 trick that found a way. I've never seen a Torbjorn player that managed to get to Diamond solely based on the damage that their turret can provide, but even worse than that was that he thought himself qualified to tell others how to play the game. I've said it twice and I'll say it again, but the worst kind of moron is one that speaks with conviction of a subject they clearly know nothing about, and more so than toxicity, the one thing that really annoys me is stupidity. After 23 agonizing minutes in which I had to witness him feeding his brains out, I eventually snapped and decided to tell him what I really thought about his nonsense. But amidst the chaos that was me arguing with a French Torbjorn was one player whose shenanigans went completely unnoticed. While I was out there trying my hardest to carry on Sigma, a hero that I have very little experience on, my Roadhog was out there throwing for content without any of us noticing. Truly, with a shining example like that, I should be able to replicate those results on my final DPS placement. I mean, let's be real here, you won't be seeing any carry performances from me on heroes that aren't zenyatta. But if I can get through all 5 matches without being blamed for a loss, then I consider that a grand victory. And with that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, our story today takes place on Route 66. Now, just to set the right expectations, I should probably mention that I don't often play DPS, and whenever I do, I have a tendency of playing it like I play support. You'll see what I mean by that in this match, but needless to say that I wouldn't end up being at the top of the scoreboard by the time this is over. But my own lack of competence is not going to be the only problem in this game, because the enemy team featured a player that I knew all too well. Their Pharah had been secretly carrying my last game where I was on tank while Torbjorn and I were bickering, and of course that meant that he'd be creating a threat that needs to be dealt with. Kicking this game off, my second DPS immediately came in with a big brain play where they made use of the fact that the enemies didn't try to hide their composition, and with that intel on our side, the first pick of the game would be ours. It was very unlike Diamonds to be holding so far in the back, but hey, if they don't want to gain any ultimate charge in anticipation of the first teamfight around the corner, then so be it. We continued moving the payload undisturbed, and while I was feeling content with peacefully fulfilling my escorting duties, my loser decided that he needed a bit more action in his life, just that said life wouldn't last very long if he continued playing so aggressively. Speaking of aggression, the enemy tanks eventually decided to join the fight rather than just sitting in the back all game, and since they were running double barrier, things fell apart for us in a flash. My wall bought us some time to get away from their tanks, but my Widowmaker was unable to deal with their Pharah, and as much as I was knocking their defensive approach, they sent us packing with very little progress on the objective to show for it. Our Lucio was trying to get all up in the defender's grill while we were regrouping, but this time I could pull up a wall to save him from suffering the same fate. What I couldn't stop, however, was the enemy Widowmaker going for an absolutely insane grappling hook jump shot, just to then headshot my Widow in the most anticlimactic way possible. To say that things weren't going great for us would be an understatement. Overwhelmed by having to deal with a Pharah as well as an opposing Widow, my second DPS asked our Lucio to swap to something that can provide more sustain for all of that incoming damage. And of course, me running main into that composition wasn't exactly helpful either. Every time I thought I could catch one of the tanks off guard with the wall, they simply walked away from it with the DLC power that was bestowed upon them by Jeff Kaplan himself. My Widowmaker continued losing the 1v1 while we didn't have anywhere near enough damage to do anything against the enemy's double barrier composition. Long story short, it's like every hero on our team was a terrible pick against what the enemies were currently doing to us, whether that was based on playstyle or just sheer character power. Some of us have been more aware of that than others, but either way, all of us were in agreement about something having to change.
I think we should swap May.
What do you want?
I don't know.
It's Kim, please.
Let's get double shield or something.
I didn't know at the time that my Lucia was one of the Reddit variety, and I definitely agreed with May not being very useful, despite her being my comfort pick. Either way, it seemed that my second DPS needed help dealing with the enemy Pharah, and as such, running a second hitscan hero might just be the play. But there's no swap in the DPS category that is going to matter if we aren't given the space to do our job, and as it turned out, our Hammond was merely warming up. It was obvious that none of the enemies had been aware of him still residing in their backline because their Orisa almost got booped off the map as a result of his flank. But McRaka was far from done when it came to messing with their defensive lineup. Nobody likes being booped around as a matter of principle, but when there's also a minefield behind you that limits your movement, that sort of thing can get even more annoying. Most Hammond players would consider this a job well done, but Raka continued to be a backline menace, not only creating space, but stopping the enemy Sigma from using his ultimate. Some people don't believe high elo players when they say that ignoring the pharmacy is a valid strategy, but that's exactly what we decided to do here. It wasn't until we had annihilated their tank line that we gave them any attention at all, and even if we can't eliminate that duo individually, all of us poking them separately meant that they could no longer occupy the sky. Since there were no other defenders left to distract us, Lucio, Hammond, and I decided to be all over that pharmacy duo, and I mean, I knew that the Pharah was a good player because I just got out of the match with them having carried me, but since I didn't have to deal with them on my own, we would eventually prevail. The defenders and their meta-abiding composition had shown us no respect up until that moment, but once we had secured the first checkpoint, they had no choice but to back off. But to complete our escort, we still had a long way to go, and you know as well as me that with a composition like ours, we had to rely on our wits more than our characters. Victory on the first checkpoint didn't come easy, but if we can overcome a double barrier comp once, then surely we'll be able to do it again. Our Hammond continued to be a backline nuisance, which meant that the defensive component of this equation wasn't even that much of a big deal. And while he did a great job staying alive, our Tracer dying early into the next engagement would make for a bad omen for our hopes of snowballing to the second point. But I watched enough Metro streams to know that the only right way to play Soldier 76 was by flanking as often and as aggressively as possible. Of course, I had to back this up with at least a mediocre amount of aim to solidify my position as a backline threat, but little did I know that the enemy Pharah had absolutely no intention of dealing with my nonsense. I mean, really, considering how good I know that guy is, getting solo ulted by him was more of a compliment than anything else. Unfortunately, my frontline was not having much more success than me. Frankly speaking, neither defenders nor attackers were showing any amount of cohesion whatsoever, but amidst the chaos, the enemy Zenyatta began fragging out. Despite that man having annihilated vital parts of our composition, our Tracer was not taking him seriously, and as such, they would be turned into yet another statistic. During scrappy teamfights like these, both teams have to make a decision. Do they want to continue staggering in until one of them comes out victorious, or do they want to go for a full reset? In our case, everybody was determined to be the one who last resides on the payload, and as such, we were in for some non-stop content momentum that couldn't be halted. My Sigma decided to make the swap to Winston, which would be a bold move in and of itself, but looking at his indecisiveness, it seemed as though even he wasn't certain why he made that decision. Some of you guys gave me a hard time for suggesting that Winston is currently the worst tank and arguably the worst character in the game, but witnessing this gameplay really shows why that is. When faced with a DLC tank lineup, there really isn't a lot of space you can create without immediately getting annihilated, and it took not only my Ana's undivided attention, but also every cooldown at her disposal just to keep him alive. There wasn't much anyone could do to help him, because vanilla characters just weren't built to compete with all that utility and damage that we currently had to oppose. Not to mention that my Ana couldn't babysit our Winston 24/7 if she tried, because let's not forget that we still had a very competent Pharah to deal with. While my tanks were trying to secure the front line, 7 was trying to hold his own in the back, and thankfully they successfully kept themselves alive long enough for a Hammond to arrive and deal the final blow. At no point in time did either of our teams decide to pull back, and since both of our spawn points were reasonably far away from the objective, it really only came down to which team could trade 2 for 1 first. Vayak was once again demonstrating just how squishy of a tank Winston really is, but thankfully the risk he took was perfectly calculated. And since there was nothing else to worry about but this one choke point, my Ana could keep him alive long enough for them to body block the opposition and secure the second checkpoint. The enemy team was obviously flustered about that failed attempt of a recontest, which gave us an opportunity to try and turn up the heat in order to collect some staggers. But things weren't meant to be so easy, because the enemy Orisa was deleting our tank line with suspiciously robotic precision, though eventually fell victim herself when the reloading of her LMG gave our remaining flankers a brief window of opportunity to take her out. We still hadn't stopped fighting ever since that brawl in the second point, but the enemy McCree was about to try and change that. You see, the thing that sucks about vanilla tanks is that they need to stop protecting their team in order order to dish out some damage, whereas DLC tanks can do both of these things at the same time. My Winston trying to create space with his Primal Rage meant that he wasn't able to save our support line from the Deadeye. That blow to our lineup was significant enough to finally stop this teamfight that had lasted for minutes on end. I was currently stuck on the flank, because of course I was when that fateful play happened, and everyone in our voice chat agreed that we couldn't fight at such a disadvantage. I was taking care of the enemy Pharah whenever I could, but if I want to be the deciding factor on this last point, just playing a supporting role is not gonna be enough. The blue team was finally able to set up a proper defense that we couldn't just bust our heads past, and I feel like I'm speaking for my entire team when I say that at this point, that final checkpoint felt very, very distant. Us coming out victorious on the back of very scrappy teamfights was speaking for us being superior when it came to individual skill, but when it comes to beating 2 CP style defender biases, it is team play that makes a difference. Team play which we had none to show off. No matter how impressive our individual eliminations were, we couldn't continue to hope for that to carry us to the end when the defenders were obviously displaying an order of magnitude more cohesion than us. Though the enemy McCree was making me doubt my own words when it came to us being superior to them in, well, any way, shape or form. Of course, a stagger elimination like that already put us on the back foot for the impeding last fight, but that wasn't our biggest problem. Much like I learned that playing Hammond into a team that has an Orisa pull, Discord Orb, and Fan Hammer combo available makes for a really bad time, our Hammond in this game would engage early despite our calls to wait, and as such create an insurmountable amount of problems for us as he found himself eliminated by these exact abilities. But whether he was alive or not, we had to get on the objective.
Wait, don't go in! What?
Fudge.
That's speed boost in 5 seconds, okay? 3, 2, 1, go. Hey, hold your shield up!
Our attack round would end not only with us failing to capture the last point, but we wouldn't even get to the objective to trigger overtime. As you can imagine, our team was very unhappy about the course this round has taken, and if you think that my Lucio complaining in voice chat was the last we're gonna hear of them, then well, I guess you haven't played a lot of ranked. Now this is one of those moments where I really want to let you guys listen in on voice chat, because I genuinely believe that it would help you understand what I was dealing with in that game. But unlike my own fits of rage, my Lucio had no obligation to keep his rants family friendly, and as such I'm gonna have to ask you to use your own imagination to figure out just how upset he really was. Spoiler alert, he was very upset.
Dude, you're just dying every time out of position, it's insane. Yeah, you're a flanker, but you're also staggering every fight.
There you go, I got you that one bit of audio in which he didn't use any profanity. You're welcome. As much as he was raising some good points, part of me couldn't help but feel like he was very readily pointing fingers just in order to distract from his own feeding, of which there definitely was plenty. My own verdict on this round was really just that we didn't have any cohesion. The enemy team was playing together while we were trying to brute force our way to victory. I decided to stay really quiet while my supports in voice chat were fighting the rest of our team in text chat, because I knew dang well that I was not contributing as much as I should be. It is very possible that we could have won that round if my individual performance was as good as theirs, but I mean, you guys know me, I'm a team player. Either way, much like my Roadhog during the last episode, I decided to just try to not attract any attention to the fact that I was definitely contributing to our team's problems. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a plan. I might not be able to create frag montage worthy plays, but if I can keep the enemy Pharah at bay, that might just be the edge that the rest of my team needed. There was absolutely no shortage of anxiety considering the fact that I was fully aware of the fact that my DPS competence could not realistically measure up to that of the enemies. I would start the round off taking way more damage than is healthy while missing the vast majority of my shots, which put my plan into question already. Vyog would be the only tank I can rely on since our Hammond was out there doing Hammond things, but little did we know that he wouldn't be the center of attention in this first fight. The enemy Pharah went for as bold a diving attempt as one can imagine, but Ash's coach gun allowed me to put her in my ideal tracking distance to take her out in a flash. I really wish I could have celebrated that victory, but I hadn't realized that the enemy team was setting up for a dive that went beyond just a pharmacy. Their Genji showed up out of nowhere to take out all of our squishies who were left on low HP following Pharah's initial dive bomb, but thankfully our Hammond came back from the spawn to end the madness. As much as we lost half of our team during that initial engagement, simple napkin math can tell you that the only thing worse than losing half of your team is losing your entire team. We succeeded in setting up a defensive position on the payload as our tanks were buying us enough time to return from the spawn. My teammates were well capable of handling themselves, and while the blue team was displaying a much greater level of cohesion, the hallmark of individual skill is being able to identify and exploit enemy misplays place, of which there were many. It sounds like an exaggeration, but my entire game plan literally was just to keep the enemy Pharah at bay, and as much as I don't have the greatest aim on this planet, it was good enough to keep sending that message. Losing repeatedly on the first point is going to challenge any team's mental no matter how positive and cooperative they are. It's gotten to the point where they decided to swap from a double barrier to a dive comp, which definitely reeks more of desperation and confidence. I mean, diving itself is not necessarily a bad idea, but what is a Winston supposed to do in the face of our DLC prowess that doesn't even allow him to get on the high ground? You would assume that just changing his target priority to a more isolated target is going to make a difference, but that is not accurate when said target is just another DLC hero. I mean, heck, I actually landed a headshot on him before he hit the ground, which meant that it didn't even wake him up, and while my Tracer continued to raise havoc in their backline, all I had to do was continue to combat the enemy Pharah, which never got tired of trying to dive me. But again, DLC versus vanilla meant that it would take them much more effort to take me out than the other way around. The blue team failed to make any progress on the objective no matter how much I decided to change their composition. Our Sigma was actually the only one making proper callouts, while the rest of us were taking our individual matchups to dismantle the attackers. I know that a lot of people believe the DPS role to be all about individual carry performances, but as you can see, I'm nowhere close to delivering hero plays, with my only multi-kill in this game coming from Bob. My entire playstyle is always built around supporting my team, and well, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But much to my surprise, it worked even in this game. Honestly, I don't even want to show you where I ended up placing, because I feel like I'm gonna piss off a lot of people by placing so high despite how very not good I am at DPS. But well, a promise is a promise, so I guess here goes nothing. Yep, I somehow ended up just shy of Masters with my supportive DPS playstyle, which, mind you, is the highest I ever placed on this role. And really, that's all I can say for this episode. I successfully completed all 5 of my playstyle matches without ever being blamed for a loss, and to me, that is an achievement. I mean, it really helps when you're not toxic in voice chat, which I have to fight not to be sometimes. But either way, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and if you did, do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out. Consider subscribing if you want to see more, and definitely ring that bell icon so that you don't miss out on the next episode. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace. Let's be real here for a second. Do you ever feel challenged in your pride when you get eliminated by somebody who plays the same hero as you? Usually, I would consider myself a pretty confident zenyatta player. Obviously not as good as your average Grandmaster, but as far as decision making, aiming, and reaction time is concerned, I feel like I'm doing pretty good for my rank. In essence, zenyatta is the one hero that I believe to be good at. But the thing with zenyatta is, as long as you have at least an adequate amount of aim, your performance is going to scale proportionally to your experience. I've always said that Zen is primarily a game sense based hero because of how forgiving projectiles are in this game as far as aim is concerned. So the more experience you gather and the better you get at making moment-to-moment decisions on any hero, the better you will do on Zenyatta. As such, there are a lot of people that play him without strictly considering themselves a main, and in a situation where the Zenyatta diff is on the table, I usually find myself coming out on top simply because of the fact that he is my main. But what happens if I feel myself challenged in my pride without immediately coming out on top? Well, my friends, the result is going to be one of the most chaotic and weird matches of Overwatch I have played in recent memory. And believe it or not, but this time it wasn't even entirely my fault. As much as this match is going to challenge me and my pride as a Zenyatta one trick, I won't be the only one who has to prove himself. Throughout the course of this match, almost every single player on my team is going to have to face their mirror matchup, and let's just say that some of them deal with pressure better than others. While most of our team was hoping for a standard poking style entry to this match, my Reinhardt, unbeknownst to most of us, decided that he would much rather try to catch the enemy team off guard at their spawn doors. Unfortunately for him, he wasn't being very stealthy about it, and as such, the enemy team would definitely see that play coming. You can imagine my surprise when our Reinhardt yeeted the enemy Mei into our front line, despite the fact that they knew he was coming, but hey, I won't be saying no to an early pick into this first fight. I was very happy to see both of our teams running a Reinhardt Zarya composition, as that is my favorite lineup in the game. Of course, I knew how to play around it, and through the power of Discord Orb, I was able to keep the enemy Reinhardt in check, who would lose a big chunk of his HP every time he dropped his barrier. While I was focused on trying to help my tanks secure the front line, the enemy team was setting up a pincer attack. Between their Mei wall blocking our line of sight and a nano-boosted Reaper laying into our tanks, there wasn't a lot we could do to help them. McCree and I had no choice but to retreat, though it was only a matter of time that the enemies would try to stagger us. Thankfully, he would keep me safe from Mei's icy clutches, but what followed was the enemy Zenyatta sneaking up on us with a cheeky right-click to send me back to the spawn. Of course, I can see in the replay that I unintentionally tanked an orb volley that was meant for my McCree, but naturally, I didn't know that at the time, and frankly speaking, I don't even know if it would have mattered. In that moment, Iggy had put forth a challenge of Zenyatta diff, and I was determined to show him who's boss. And I mean, a Houston Outlaw skin, really? Either way, with us getting staggered, there was nothing that could stop the attackers from securing the first point. That created a big problem for us because Havana isn't what I would describe as the most well-designed map in the game, meaning chances of us being able to stop the card before regaining our 2 CP advantage at the very end of the third point were slim. My Ana was running in overdrive as she was trying to make sure that no more members of our team continued to get staggered. Needless to say that losing anyone at this point could have devastating consequences for our chances to win, and it seemed like she was very aware of that. But just surviving wouldn't be good enough. If we wanted to put a stop to the attacker's advance, we'd have to get tricky, and my McCree would be the one with just that trick up his sleeves. Thanks to the recent fixing of audio issues, Lord Assault knew exactly when to strike from the shadows, allowing him to take out the enemy Mei as they were trying to go for a flank. And since there were no icy walls to worry about, he could finish his play with a Deadeye from the top ropes. And despite the fact that retreating would be the best course of action for the attackers, the enemy main tank decided that now was the time to put the Reinhardt differential on the table. Naturally, it is my job as a Zenyatta to delete Reinhardt players off the map, but it was rather obvious to me that this situation was a shatter waiting to happen. A shatter did happen, and I did dodge it so that I can save my stunned Widowmaker. But I would not remain free of crowd control effects as I ate a sleep dart while clearly hiding behind the box. But hey, this isn't the first time Zenyatta decided to prove how broken his hitbox is, and at least my team was there to keep me safe. The Reinhardt aside, the enemy team was very good at avoiding unnecessary staggers, which allowed them to attempt another attack rather swiftly, though my Widowmaker was very aggressively peeking to make sure we can start this fight off with an advantage. Unfortunately, my Reinhardt decided that engaging 6v5 would not make for an honorable exchange, which means that he took it upon himself to equalize the engagement by running it down mid. My Widowmaker, meanwhile, tried the hardest to put us on their back and make use of the fact that the enemy team didn't seem bothered by the fact that they were popping heads in their backline, though eventually even they would wake up to the fact that she was causing trouble. At that point, we found ourselves heavily under fire due to a distinct lack of shield tank protection, and I figured that I'd take my chances trying to 2v1 the Zarya that was chasing my Widow over getting poked into oblivion, just that a random Reinhardt charge would stop me before I could execute that plan. That act of violence had caused a massive brawl down in the cellar with a graviton switch being tossed into the room, and despite the fact that we were the ones challenging them, the enemy Ana being down there keeping their tanks alive meant that my Reinhardt would find himself eliminated once again. But me having tanked a charge that was clearly meant to get her meant that Veen was still alive to keep us in the game. They continued to pick off targets one by one, not only as a display of their destructive potential, but also to preserve the rest of our team that held onto dear life. But the attackers were determined to keep this payload running with a desperate counter-graviton that I could only barely catch up to using Transcendence from spawn. My Ana had fallen, which meant that I, as the only remaining support, would now have to act as our team's spear as well as their shield. Juggling the destructive power of my Discord Orb with the restorative properties of my Harmony Orb, I succeeded in keeping the rest of my team on their feet, ready to fight once more. It was simple cleanup from here on out, and much like I felt the bag when I got sleep-darted, I figured keeping it lighthearted amidst these difficult encounters could help my team's morale. What I didn't expect was for my Reinhardt to have a mental breakdown in response to my teabag, causing him to try and initiate friendly fire by using his ultimates. To say that things had taken an unexpected turn would be an understatement. Our entire team was rather confused about his actions, and needless to say that we would have rather had him use that ultimate against the enemy team. Well, the only thing we can do now is hope that he calms himself down before the next team fight. Being a tank player in the current meta can definitely take a toll on one's mental, and our Reinhardt was the perfect example of that. I was flabbergasted about him having used his ultimate in response to a friendly teabag, but I guess that taught me not to challenge my tank's ego if I'm hoping to win this game. Either way, while we were still hurting in confusion, the enemy team had made swaps to their lineup, and it appeared that they knew exactly who they wanted to target. But the thing with said target is that his brain is just absolutely gargantuan. He faked being AFK to attract the attention of the enemy team just to turn around and flash hammer them back to their spawn. Of course, that play didn't go unnoticed, and shortly after the failed first attempt, the next challenger appeared just to suffer the exact same fate. At that point, the remaining enemy players had decided it was time for a full retreat, which for better or for worse, we didn't have the means to stop. Obviously, I was still trying to Zenyatta diff Iggy, but I just couldn't find a good time and angle to take him out. His tanks were much more competent than mine, meaning it took all of my attention just to keep them at bay, putting my own revenge on the back burner. I was definitely glad to see how good of a job my Widowmaker was doing without demanding as much as a minimal amount of healing. Players like that are difficult to come by, though that performance also meant that the enemy team, including their Zenyatta, kept disengaging their fights to avoid getting staggered by them. Though all good things have to come to an end when an aggressive forward play caused my Widow to get picked off, but I wasn't about to let that Sombra get away with murder, overextending myself to avenge my comrade for the sake of their morale. As it turned out, I would not be alone on the front lines because my Ana joined my reckless assault to try and take out their counterpart, though as we all know, hitting an Ana and her weird crooked frame isn't easy at the best of times, especially especially not when you're on a timer. And before we knew it, that timer had caught up to us in form of their respawning teammates, and suddenly the two of us found ourselves in a particularly troublesome position. This is one of those do as I say and not do as I do situations. The only thing keeping my Ana alive was my constant barrage of headshots stopping the enemies from just walking into us, and the only thing keeping me alive was my Ana's never-ending stream of healing darts. It was obvious that we were pressing our luck a bit too much, eventually ending up in a prime position to be shattered. But if nothing else, we are definitely consistent, trying to make up for a bad positioning by throwing every ultimate we had at the enemy Reinhardt to keep ourselves alive. Meanwhile, the enemy team continued to swap their composition, now coming up with a Widowmaker that just kept staring at a single location like an absolute weirdo. That play must have been so basic that my Widowmaker didn't expect it, but I'm dueling sweaty Valorant wannabes on a regular, meaning all it took for me to deal with them was a Discord ult and a charged volley. Once again, it was simple cleanup from here on out, and I gotta say I was very surprised about us having held onto the second checkpoint for as long as we have. Frankly speaking, I was afraid about what's gonna happen if we lose it. Our Widowmaker was good, no doubt, but a DPS can only do so much with the amount of space they are given, and it was clear at this point that the enemy tanks were much better at creating set space than ours. But apparently, Veen was not interested in taking the Widow 1v1 in the first place, having swapped to a Genji while searching for his counterpart, but what he found was not what he was looking for. Said Widowmaker in question remained undetected, and as beneficial as it was to have taken out the enemy zenyatta, not dealing with them meant that we were in for a lot of trouble. At least our Genji was still tearing through the enemy squishies with, dare I say, frightening speed and competence, a performance you really don't expect to see from that hero in the year 2021. But all the competence in the world is not going to matter against an uncontested Widowmaker that gets to fire into a graviton surge with no care on the walls. I didn't have Transcendence up to counter it yet again, and as I witnessed my comrades fall one after the other, I decided the last thing I can do to honor their death was taking out the one responsible for it. The attackers were en route to capture the second point, and if we were still planning to stop them, we had to react, and that fast. The spawn advantage was definitely on our side as the cult was approaching its next capture point, but what wasn't on our side was the ultimate advantage. The enemy Genji was very quick about charging up that Dragon Blade, considering I didn't even realize they had a Genji, and surprisingly enough, I was the last survivor. I think it goes without saying that I didn't live to regroup with the rest of my team, and in general, our situation was looking rather dire. Since Havana is a beautifully designed map with a lot of very cool sniper sightlines, we literally couldn't help but sit in our spawn as we were waiting for the infra sight to run out. But ultimately, it was just as I predicted. Widowmaker simply reigned supreme on the last point of Havana, and since their tanks were so good at creating space, said Widowmaker didn't even have to be particularly good to make use of it. At the end, I wouldn't be able to establish dominance over the enemy zenyatta, and in this lobby where both teams are running nearly identical lineups, it would be the attackers that ultimately came out with the team diff. Oh yeah, did I mention that this is a quick play match? Hey, I'm really sorry about this not being ranked. I know how much you guys have been enjoying the competitive videos recently, but honest to God, I find playing for content extremely difficult right now. Listen, I don't want to bore you with the details. I just got this match while quick playing in my off time, and I actually felt like there was so much random stuff happening that it might be worth turning it into a video. And hey, if you still enjoyed it, then do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out, and consider subscribing if you want to see more. Thank you everybody so much for watching. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and thanks as well to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. Peace!